You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
So you make movies, huh?
I produce feature motion pictures.
I got an idea for a movie.
Doesn't everybody?
Yesterday you were a loan shark.
Yeah, but I was never that into it.
You think the movie business is any different?
Ray, look at me. Why don't you take a look at that? You must bring something heavy to the deal.
I do.
I think you'll turn around and go back to Miami.
Personal injury law has a bad reputation. They call us ambulance chasers, bottom feeders, vultures who prey on the misfortunes of others. Well, if that's true, why do I lie awake nights worrying about my clients?
12 deaths over 15 years, 8 of them children. They think it has something to do with the city's drinking water.
Why does their pain become my pain?
I'm not interested in money. None of us are. That's not why we're doing this. What we want to know is what happened.
I wish I could find a way not to empathize with them. It'd be a lot easier.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on. Invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise. And at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoid, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week is our patron-voted episode, so if you want some of that glorious voting power, join the sleaze.
That's right. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an honor shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we are been doing for like 7 years now. There's like 180, coming up on 190 bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series where we talk about new release genre films all year long, which we're approaching 60 of. So there's a lot of content over there. Patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast if you're interested. And speaking of which, we had a lot of people make the jump this week. We're going to give them their shout outs here. We had Ali Raja sign up. We had Viblet, Nick Hender, Slime Main Lagunk. I think that's our boy, our boy Slime over at the Tivoli Cinema. Patrick Basler, Matthew Stan Solovich, Brendan Murray, Marcel North Gallant, LP Gertner, Sam Denista, Luke Bell, Samuel Maurice Page, Bitfan 2011, Sam Kenini, Dylan Bernstein, Noah Miller, Evan, Tim Hodgson, and last but not least, we had Eric Greenwood here, who actually upgraded their membership to the annual tier and is going to be joining us for the monthly virtual screening, which we try to do on the last Thursday of any given month, sometimes a day in the last week of the month, but near the end of the month. So
we try our best.
Keep your eyes peeled on the Patreon for when we announce those screenings. And thanks to all you folks for signing up. Hope you're enjoying all those bonus episodes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're listening on either one of those platforms, be sure to give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners. And the last plug, as always, is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything that you freaks can think of. And you have thought of a lot of stuff. You have gotten notebooks. You have gotten hoodies, pillows, coffee mugs. If you're interested in anything like that, the link to that is in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I'm your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over on the main feed would have heard from us, where we would have had special guests Nate and Will of the A Closer Look podcast on to discuss for the first time on the show late period Robert Altman, because we had talked so much about his New Hollywood area and we had never been asked, do you want to talk about his John Grisham adaptation of The Gingerbread Man from 1998? Not a single person had asked that question.
And we
decided to do it
on the opportunity.
That's right. We jumped and we were like, what's the pairing? And they said, what about his completely absurd gynecologist satire romantic comedy, Dr. T and the Women from the year 2000? Which we had just an absolute blast breaking down the bonkers finale of, I will say, without spoiling it for everyone.
Yeah, it's insane if you've never seen it. It is just honestly hilarious that is the double feature. Just who thought that would be the perfect double feature, but it really is. Wonderful stuff.
That's right. So if you haven't heard that episode, that was 2 weeks ago over on the main feed. And then last week over on the Patreon, exclusively for the patron listeners, it's that time. There is a new Final Destination movie out in theaters right now. And we decided we would go back and we would talk about the new metal, New Line Cinema, Rube Goldberg death machine that is that franchise. We talked about the original film from 2000, written and directed by the X-Files alumni James Wong and Glenn Morgan. And then we talked about the insanely comically mean-spirited and far more disgusting sequel by veteran stunt coordinator David R. Ellis from 2003.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see the kind of one death that represents the rest of the franchise in the first one, and then the other ones have a little bit more sadness involved in kind of character, and then it just every single one from the sequels onward are just constant death machines, just of the most elaborate type. It's absolutely hilarious. I just watched
How
the third one.
crazy and chunky can you make it?
Yeah, exactly. I just watched the third one the other night, and it has the tanning bed sequence and all of that. If you've never seen it, obviously you wouldn't know what I'm talking about, but it's made me scared of household appliances for probably the rest of my life. So
That's right. So I haven't heard that episode. That was last week over on the Patreon. Go back and check it out. But moving on to this week, we have a very special returning guest coming back. He is a film critic. He is a historian. He is a podcaster. He is an author. We have talked about him with him actually about his books like Fun City Cinema, and I've even been on one of his podcasts, A Very Good Year, even though I think he's got a new podcast going now. But that guest is Jason Bailey. Jason, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me back, you guys. Third Timers Club. I feel like I must be in some sort of elite company. I don't know how many third timers there are, how many more than third timers there are.
Yeah, there's a couple people I think holding the belt slightly above you. We've had some fifth and sixth timers, I think.
God damn. Okay.
There are not too many. I'd have to go back through the list and look, and it is an exclusive club to be definitely even just more than two. Yeah. And we're glad to have welcomed you into it.
Well, thank you for sending over my smoking jacket, my official Third Timers Club smoking jacket. I'm wearing it right now, and feeling really good about being back. Yeah, both of the previous ones, if I recall correctly, were Fun City pegged.
They were. So really what needs to happen here is you just need to keep writing more books. The faster you put out books, the more frequently we're going to just have you back.
Totally. No, that is a good plan. That's good motivation. I am currently fairly deep in the research on the next one, and it will offer all sorts of opportunities for us to pair things up and really wallow in the trash, I think, on the next one. We got some classy picks today, but the next book is about Die Hard. So I'm currently watching a lot of the Die Hard on A ripoffs. Some of which are pretty great trash. So yeah,
I'm expecting a lengthy chapter on our personal favorite, Sudden Death.
Sudden Death will be in there. Just yesterday I spent a little quality time with No Contest. I'm not sure if you've seen No Contest with
I've not seen it,
Shannon
but I am aware
Tweed.
of it.
Yeah, Shannon Tweed, Robert Davi, and in the Alan Rickman role, Andrew Dice Clay. It's
best movie ever made.
It's a real. Yeah, it's good stuff. But sorry, we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's
before we get into talking about your next book, let's briefly talk about your latest book, which is out now and is about the Sopranos actor and all-around fantastic actor in a ton of films, in both of the films we're going to be talking about today, James Gandolfini, called Gandolfini, Jim, Tony, and the Life of a Legend. How has the book tour gone? Where did this book come from? Where were you in your process when you were like, I need to write about Mr. James Gandolfini?
I mean, the shortest possible version is that I was approached by Abrams Press, is the publisher on this one. Abrams put out Fun City Cinema. Abrams Press is their imprint that is less about the sort of big, handsome coffee table art heavy books and are more about just book books with maybe some pictures in the middle. And Jameson Stoltz, who runs that imprint, came to me and said, have you ever thought about writing like just a biography, like a straight up, cradle to grave biography, which I hadn't, because I was sort of terrified of the idea. It seemed like something that was fairly easy to do adequately in my experience of reading them, and pretty hard to do really, really well. But ultimately I was like, well, if that's something that scares me, then I should do that. He initially came to me about doing a John Candy book, which I worked on for quite some time before finding out there was not only another John Candy book in the works, but a John Candy documentary that his family was involved in. And so we regrouped, we went back to the drawing board, and he said, well, who else would you like to write a biography about? And I don't know if I was just thinking of sort of, great heavyset actors who we lost when they were too young, but Jim was the first one who came to mind. And they were into it because Abrams Press put out a really good Sopranos book a few years ago, The Sopranos Sessions by Matt Zoller Seitz and Alan Sepinwall. So they were like, yeah, go for it. And so that was the beginning of the journey. I've always loved him and always felt, honestly, like at risk of undervaluing how tremendous his work is on The Sopranos, which it is. I've always felt like that role casts such a shadow over the career that people don't, I think, fully appreciate what a tremendous, versatile, prolific actor he was, that there was so much more to him as an actor than that character. And so that ended up kind of being what I hoped to accomplish with the book, was just to sort of get into his process as an actor and to hopefully help people appreciate the tremendous breadth of what he could do as an actor on film.
Yeah, I find him to be incredibly memorable in both of these movies, even though he does take more of the side role. But honestly, as opposed, obviously we have Travolta that we're going to talk about a lot too in these, but I think Gandolfini is probably the second most memorable character actor in both of these films, just because of the impact he makes in the small amount of time he has. And it's nice to see him in both of these movies, like Get Shorty. He can kind of play a little bit of his comedic side, whereas obviously with the civil action, it's a much more grounded, dramatic role. So it's cool to see both sides of it.
And a very sneakily important one in a civil action as well.
Yes.
I think, but we're already spoiling it here for you, Jason. But what two films are we talking about today that James Gandolfini appears in that can maybe set the record straight on, the fact that he had a wider career than people sometimes think he does?
So these are two of his key pre-Sopranos films. We have Get Shorty from 1995 by director Barry Sonnenfeld, and A Civil Action from 1998 from director Steven Zaillian. Again, both of these are, I wanted to pick them first of all because they're both so very different from Tony Soprano. And not just in terms of the kinds of characters, because actually, he could have played the role he plays in Get Shorty very similarly to Tony Soprano or to some of the other sort of heavies that he had done before it. But he went in a really kind of wonderfully unexpected direction there. But I wanted to sort of spotlight roles that were really different from Tony Soprano, and that also, like you say, really, this was his specialty in the 90s. He was a terrific ensemble player who would come in and do, a handful of scenes and work for a couple of weeks and sometimes just steal the movie and then cruise on to whatever the next one was. He was kind of a gunslinger in this era. And I think these are two of the best examples of that.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We even just accidentally happened to talk about this as well because we covered Crimson Tide just a couple weeks ago when we wanted to talk about Gene Hackman, and that was one where I had almost forgotten he was in that and how much he stood on his feet against, actors like, who were also appearing in the supporting cast, like Viggo Mortensen was in there, for example. And, it was just, he was really fantastic. And I'm excited to jump into both of these. So let's get started here. Let's start off with the earliest one when he was still just coming off those kind of like Tony Scott supporting roles of goon roles he was kind of appearing in. Let's talk about Get Shorty.
With a star, he'll never sign with or without my help.
And Danny DeVito.
Looking at you, I'm having memories of us. And I'm wondering, how did it go wrong? How did it all slip away?
Well, it didn't slip away, Martin. You did when you went off with Nikki at my birthday party.
Yeah, that was a good party.
Rough business, this movie business.
Don't you puke on my shoes, Harry.
I may have to go back to loan sharking just to take a rest.
Get Shorty. Fade out.
All right, we are talking Get Shorty, the 1995 mob crime caper meets industry satire directed by Barry Sonnenfeld, written by Scott Frank, who was obviously adapting the Elmore Leonard novel from 1990 and starring, in this case, John Travolta. Actually, I guess both are starring John Travolta, even though we want to talk about Gandolfini. But Travolta, you know, he's doing some interesting work here. This is right after the Pulp Fiction craze. So in this movie, he is playing a Miami loan shark named Chili Palmer, one of the all-time great 90s character names right there, who travels to Hollywood to collect a debt from a B-movie producer and instead finds he kind of likes the idea of being a Hollywood executive shark instead, and realizes that maybe some of his skills at the former job might be transferable to the latter, and gets involved in all kinds of movie industry antics with a ridiculous supporting cast, including Gene Hackman, Rene Russo, Danny DeVito, Dennis Farina, Delroy Lindo, and of course James Gandolfini. This is technically our fourth time actually talking about the NYU grad student who worked on pornos to pay the bills, turned Hollywood cinematographer and director, Mr. Barry Sonnenfeld. But actually our first time talking about his directorial output, which includes films like The Addams Family and Men in Black. But prior to that, he was the cinematographer on the early Coen brothers films, all of which we have talked about, including their debut Southern existential crime gone wrong neo-noir Blood Simple, their screwball-y, almost sort of Looney Tunes ex-con crime caper Raising Arizona, and their dark period gangster drama Miller's Crossing. All incredibly gorgeously photographed movies with different moods, different settings, different styles. Barry Sonnenfeld really proved what he could do with the camera, working with them. And though his directorial output is decidedly more commercial than the more sort of independent work that he did with the Coens, it was very cool still, I think, to see him apply many of his sort of visually athletic tricks that he did to big budget studio fare. The last time I watched Men in Black, I hadn't watched it since I was like much younger, and I had completely forgotten how much of that, like how much style there was to how he realized sort of Ed Solomon's like comic booky vision of a buddy cop movie meets like wacky conspiratorial like science fiction, like just the animated camera movements and the absurd yet very tactile effects work and production design, and obviously his eye for comedic performances as well. Tommy Lee Jones in that movie truly gives one of the most like the funniest weary deadpan performances I've ever seen in a movie, just based around how straight of a face can he hold around all the animated craziness that Sonnenfeld populates it with. So Sonnenfeld I think just took a lot from working with those guys into his directorial career.
Definitely. Yeah. He was, I gotta say, I feel like his early directorial career is a real run. Like he did sort of like terrific movie after terrific movie and then really fell off. It's almost a Rob Reiner level drop off. And I'm not sure exactly why that happened.
You're not a big RV guy is what I'm getting.
No, I'm not.
Classic.
Once again, all bad ideas. Now, I will also say this. I don't know if you've ever watched his Netflix show of Series of Unfortunate Events.
I've seen some episodes.
I actually didn't know that he directed those.
He was sort of like the initial creative mind behind it and directed a lot of episodes of it. I have young daughters. I have one who's now 8 and one who's 11. The oldest went through a Series of Unfortunate Events period, and sometimes your kids are into a thing that you dread, and sometimes your kids are into a thing like, yeah, fuck it, let's watch another one. And it was very much one of the latter for me, at least.
That's great.
This movie was really important to me when it came out in the fall of 95. As a Tarantino guy, which is just like sometimes hard to even admit, is like was such a cliche. Like, I was in college. I was like a freshman in college when Pulp Fiction came out. I was working at a video store in high school when Reservoir Dogs came out. Like, I read a whole bunch of Elmore Leonard books because I read in an interview somewhere that Quentin Tarantino said he learned how to write from reading Elmore Leonard books. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I was it was very much in that pocket where he was the celebrity director, and all of us who were his disciples were watching and reading everything he'd ever mentioned in an interview as being an inspiration to him. So I read Get Shorty before I saw it. I read Rum Punch before he made Jackie Brown. I read Out of Sight before that came out. Like, I was primed for all of these. And this was also a fascinating period for Travolta because I remember this so clearly. The first 3 movies he did after Pulp Fiction, of which this was the first, all seemed like movies Quentin Tarantino had told him to make. You know, like this one was based on a novel by his favorite novelist. After this, he did White Men's Burden, which was produced by Lawrence Bender. And then after that, he did Broken Arrow, which was his first John Woo movie. Those all felt like movies that Tarantino was like in his ear saying, go make this one next. So that I remember all of that happening really clearly when it was coming out.
Yeah, I think Travolta was saying something like it was Tarantino that pushed him to do the movie. And then he also was saying that at first the script wasn't really reflecting the book as much as he wanted him to, and that's why Travolta originally denied the role. And then I think it was Tarantino too that said, well, why don't you just push them to do more? And Travolta didn't think of having that kind of power, but then started to. They said that they'd throw the stuff in. I think 2 of the particular ones he said in the interview I watched was he wanted to make sure that him watching the movie in the theater was in there, which I think is such a great scene and essential. Him looking around and
one of the best scenes in the movie.
Mouthing the dialogue and like looking over to a stranger and being like, wasn't that great? Like, just love it.
Yes.
And then the coat
that's
being
my
stolen.
favorite moment.
Yeah, me too. Honestly, the theater scene I absolutely love, and then the coat being stolen in the restaurant by Ray, I believe, somehow wasn't in it. That almost seems crucial to even the plotting and stuff.
It is.
No, it wasn't that it wasn't in it. I think it was that he said that they had changed the dialogue to like, you know, like that asshole stole my coat or something, and he had been like, in the book, it's like this way more specific thing about how, you know, like my wife bought me that coat and it cost $379 and I'm walking out here with money if you don't give me that coat. And it was the Elmore Leonard flourish with the dialogue of that he was really looking for, which is really interesting to me because I was always curious how much of this was if Travolta was like, I saved this movie, because I was like, the writer here is someone who knows Elmore Leonard. It's Scott Frank.
Oh, sure does. Yes.
You know, who is like a pretty underrated like industry screenwriter who wrote, you know, Dead Again for Kenneth Branagh. He adapted Minority Report for Spielberg, and most recently, similarly to the director we're going to be talking about next, has kind of become a bit of a TV guy where he did that TV show about Anya Taylor-Joy playing chess or whatever, based on that book by the Hustler and Color of Money guy, and obviously, you know, became a director himself. He did that bank robbery thriller The Lookout, which is quite good, and he adapted that Lawrence Block series of detective novels
Also
for
good.
Walk Among the Tombstones. Yeah, like this is a guy who is, you know, a pretty novelistic screenwriter who cares a lot about adaptation. And so I've always found it, I've heard this story a lot, and I've always found it always super strange with the idea that John Travolta was like, I'm the one who told Scott Frank it should be more like an Elmore Leonard novel. And I was like, I don't know if that's true.
It easily could have been something more egotistical where he had like those two specific things weren't in the script, and he's like, I brought them in there and that saved the entire movie. Like I have no idea.
It's also very possible that like producers above Scott Frank's head were the ones who said, you know, you need to translate this and make this a little bit simpler. And I don't, you know, it could have been other people's decision as well. But I am glad that we got what we got because, you know, Elmore Leonard was just such an iconic pulp western and crime thriller novelist, and he had been adapted plenty of times before this, and especially in the western genre. Like was inspiration on The Tall T. He'd been adapted into 3:10 to Yuma, Joe Kidd, and it really did feel like, you know, his voice and the way that he wrote dialogue wasn't being captured. And I think that Tarantino briefly kind of filled that void for people, where he said, look, I wrote characters inspired by him. And then as soon as Tarantino was a success, they said, I think it's time for like real Elmore Leonard to hit the screens. And Get Shorty was the first one out the gate, but it also turned into Tarantino doing Jackie Brown, Steven Soderbergh doing Out of Sight. And I mean,
adapted by Scott Frank, by the way.
Yeah, Scott Frank as well. Yeah, so it's just, you know, like these three films, you put them together into an Elmore Leonard like 90s crime trilogy. Three of the best films of the 90s, arguably, you know?
Yeah.
They're
definitely.
very good.
So the other thing that is fascinating about that, though, is do you know, and I don't know if this was on the special features you guys watch, do you know who Barry Sonnenfeld's actual first choice for the role of Chili Palmer was?
I do. And it would be so interesting if that happened. I'll let you reveal.
On the audio commentary, he says he wanted Danny DeVito to play Chili Palmer because he feels that he felt at that time that Danny DeVito was the most confident person he had ever met. And that he had that innate sense of self-confidence was so important for the character of Chili Palmer. But ultimately, cooler heads, maybe even DeVito himself, who was a producer on the picture, said, you can't have a movie called Get Shorty and Chili Palmer is shorter than the guy who's shorty. It doesn't really scan. So ultimately cast him in that role. Do we all know who Shorty was inspired by? Was this, and really most of the industry satire element here was based on Mr. Leonard's experience with a failed, aborted adaptation of his novel La Brava that was supposed to star Dustin Hoffman. Wow. This was a big, when Golden Globus were in their let's get reputable phase of Canon films in like the mid 80s. And when they had all that money to spend and they were trying to sort of buy respectability, one of the projects that they had taken out ads in the trades for, the whole 9 yards, was this adaptation of La Brava, Elmore Leonard's novel that was to star Dustin Hoffman. They announced it. They never actually signed him for it, which was a very Golden Globus thing to do. But he told stories and wrote about it, I think kind of when the movie came out, that they had spent months in New York in a hotel, taking like daily meetings with Dustin Hoffman, trying to work through the character, trying to work through what the adaptation would be, only for Hoffman to sort of decide at the end that he wasn't going to do the movie and to walk away from it. So that's where a lot of those characteristics of the Martin Weir character come from, were from that experience of working with Dustin Hoffman, and the little mentions of how he commits to everything, and even the way he orders meals. That was a lot of that, from what I understand, came from the time that Mr. Leonard spent with Mr. Hoffman.
That's incredible. I mean, I will say Danny DeVito plays a fantastic, just like pretentious actor, working you through his process. I don't think that there's a funnier scene in the movie than when Travolta sits there and tries to direct him, and you just get to see him, puts his head in his hands, and he's like, I'm really trying to get into this Italian gangster character who sees right through you and doesn't give a shit. And it's very funny watching them just kind of go back and forth. And credit to, I want to say, Travolta here too. From what I understand, I didn't have time to hit the actual commentary or not, but I read briefly in someone who was talking about the recent Sonnenfeld autobiography that Sonnenfeld said that Travolta in this, he had funny stories about this, but he said that Travolta was in like full drunk on power movie star mode, and he wasn't learning his lines. He was coasting on charisma. Apparently everyone hated working with him, including Gene Hackman. Wow. And then the movie came out, and every single one of them were basically like, damn, he's pretty great. Yeah,
he's insanely good in this. And what's wild too is that he's incredibly likable, and even though he does awful things and he's clearly violent and has a past of probably like has bodies buried somewhere, you still like are rooting for the guy, and you understand why people think he's charming, and the confidence that he exudes in every single scene that he goes into. He does seem like he would be kind of capturing this charm, and it's funny to think that everyone was just hating him the entire time.
Yes.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, it's like, that's just incredibly interesting to me, and I do think that it does, like, Travolta does seem to just capture the easygoing quality of the movie. Like, I feel like he is structured as someone who gets to react to people who are in what feels like a more high stakes plot, and he walks in and feels like he changes that movie. He feels like he comes in and he's just like, you know, like, this is technically a movie about an Italian mob loan shark hunting, like violently hunting people down for gambling debts, and then just hitting LA and being like, wouldn't it be fun to just be a movie producer? And don't you think that on some level I could just use my skills at negotiations and skills at intimidations and all of this, and it would be incredibly useful applied to the equally corrupt and greedy, you know, sort of Hollywood industry. And it's a very basic idea. I really don't think it's more developed than that basic idea. And the rest of it is, how do we just have fun hanging out within that and build a sort of comically convoluted paperback, you know, plot around it of like multiple sources of stolen cash being pursued and leveraged and murdered over. But what's just so interesting to me about the movie is it really does feel like it has Travolta's energy that he's bringing to the screen, which is that it's like, but this is all fine. Even when someone gets murdered in this movie, you're like, oh, it's kind of funny. You know?
It is. Like they paint it in this comical way. Even later on, like when Harry, for instance, gets kind of beat up and they say they have to like open up his jaw with mechanics, they go off camera and they just see his feet kind of tense up, and it has this more comical effect rather than just watching the surgery being done or whatever it is.
Well, and I think you get the sense of humor of the movie from like the opening moment when you're introduced to Travolta here. He's got the slick hair, he's smoking, he's doing the Italian mobster routine, but obviously he's also a cinephile who he brings up, you know, he has dreams of operating the Granville Theater in Miami and playing like old Jimmy Cagney movies and stuff like that. But the opening moment you mentioned earlier, Jamie, is when he has his leather jacket borrowed or stolen from the coat check by the local Florida asshole mobster goon Ray Bones Barboni, played by Dennis Farina, the wonderful 80s actor from, we've talked about previously in Thief, in Manhunter. He's so good in Midnight Run as well.
It's kind of funny.
The late 80s.
He's kind of replaying his. Well, I can't remember which movie came first. This movie came first, I believe. But he's in Snatch. He kind of plays this character like over again, where he even travels somewhere because he's kind of getting screwed over on a deal. He's loudmouthed American guy, and then he comes back like on the with
he's so great at just being like angry and exasperated, but like over things that you feel like don't like matter that much. And that's what's so funny is he, as a power move, he just decides, I'm gonna take this guy's coat because fuck this guy. And Travolta literally, you just get this oneer of him like basically, you know, walking out the door, getting in a car, driving over to his place, knocking on the door, breaking his nose, and walking out with the jacket. And then you get him coming back and trying to like threaten him with a gun, and he shoots a shot grazing his head and humiliating him behind all of these bandages. He can barely talk through like his broken nose bandages that he's got and everything like that. And he's unable to do anything because Travolta, or Chili, is protected by this New York boss named Momo, who every single character goes, Momo? There's a guy named Momo? It's kind of a recurring joke of the movie. But it immediately cuts to Momo dying of a heart attack at his surprise 65th birthday party. And right in that single edit, I went, oh, okay. I see where this is the sense of humor. This is like the kind of, we're in a sort of like dark underworld, but it's not the tone with which we're going to treat it at all.
Yeah, they're going to constantly undercut and kind of pull the rug out from under you. Like, I love the way that they design that whole approach to the party, where you're in this really like kind of dark, dingy apartment, or even it almost even looks like a warehouse of some kind or something. And then he's going up the stairs. It's all in this like close proximity of where the camera is to the character, so you think someone could pop out at any minute and stab him or shoot him, and then it just turns into a 65th birthday party. So it's great the way it kind of translates how the movie's going to proceed.
I think that to go back to something you were talking about earlier, I think this is really key. The Dennis Farina character, I think, is a huge part of why the Chili Palmer character is so likable, why he can get away with being such a sympathetic figure, sort of the center of the thing, that we're not bothered by the unsavory aspects of the character, because we have this other much more malevolent brutal kind of character that counterbalances him. And, like this is, I mean, there's literally a scene where Dennis Farina like punches a woman in the face.
Right.
It doesn't upset the tone of the thing, but he will always seem comparatively benign. And not to pull everything back to Gandolfini, but I actually think that is a huge part of why Tony Soprano was often at least a character of something resembling sympathy, someone who we liked on that show, was because they always took pains, almost season by season, to have a much more villainous gangster character who he was in contrast to and often in conflict with. Richie Aprile, or the character that Ralphie Cicero that Joey Pants played, like almost every single season. Frank Vincent's character in the last couple seasons, there was always somebody who was a much darker, nastier character, and so he seemed sort of comparatively okay, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And
my mom once described The Sopranos to me. This was very funny because it took me a while before I watched it, because I don't know why, but I felt like it was one of those things I was just kind of saving. I was like, I'm really going to savor that watch. Everyone says it's the best show ever. Sure. I finally did watch it a few years ago, and I agreed. I was like, it's the best show I've ever seen. But my mom watched it before me, and she was just watching it on HBO or whatever, and she literally, she doesn't quite know exactly how to say, but she was basically like, well, so he's a gangster. He does these really awful, awful things. And she was like, but you like him.
Yeah.
And that was it. That's
the pitch. That's a good pitch.
Yeah, and I was just like, and I was like, it's true. It takes, sometimes an actor, does need to perform a little bit of a magic act to be like, there's redeeming qualities to this person, despite the things that you're gonna make me watch them do.
Yeah, and the thing about Chili is that he does come off as someone with, it's like he has a moral compass, but it's just his own. He has this kind of, he has a sense of what is fair and what he thinks is just, but it's definitely not the same sense that we have. It's just it's that there's a set of rules of some kind. Whereas with Ray, he's just off the rails the entire time. I mean, especially when he hits that woman. I mean, there's really nothing else like that in the movie. So, and with Chili, he doesn't necessarily jump to violence. Oftentimes, because of how charming and kind of articulate he is, he's able to use his words to get out of a lot of situations, and normally only jumps to the violence when he has to. And he's very good at it when he has to. I mean, he never seems troubled or worried about his situation.
I like how mad he gets that someone doesn't know the difference between ergo and for example.
One of my favorite moments is when he and Bear, who Gandolfini plays, they kind of have this scuffle in a parking lot, and he kind of sucker punches him, so Gandolfini goes down and everything.
One of the best scenes in the movie,
for sure. And we can get to the context of it, but my favorite part of it is just afterwards, where even after he did that, he's like, okay, I've done what I need to do to disengage, just de-escalate the situation. But now, like, could you tell me, like, what movies were you in, man? I heard you were a stunt guy. Like, and he's just like, no, I've never, like, they're small movies, you wouldn't have heard of them. And he's like, no, I might have. Tell me. And that small detail is what makes him likable. He just beat a dude up in a parking lot, but now I'm like, now let's just talk film, baby. It's awesome.
I mean, on some level, he's right. Being a successful producer is partially just being like a people person that someone wants to work with and having a passion for movies. And like that is, he's like, what else do I need to know about making movies? Like at one point, I think on the phone call, that's exactly what he says, right? He's like, I don't really think you got to know much else about making movies. Funny. You just got to know money. You gotta like them on some level a little bit. And I mean, that's why you do, I think, enjoy spending the time that you spend with this character, and why he is able to win so many people over to his side, even if he starts from a position of being scary or kind of confrontational, because I mean that's how he first meets so many of the characters in this movie, is that Bones becomes his superior because of the death of Momo, and he's the one who sends him on a trip to Vegas hunting down some debt in their books from a dry cleaner shop owner named Leo, who his wife Faye thinks he's like faked his death in this big sort of like plane crash for airline settlement money, and has since fled to LA. So while doing that job, he acquires a second job from a Vegas bookie, also trying to collect gambling gambling debts from essentially a Roger Corman-esque B horror movie producer who's kind of dressed like Brian De Palma, named Harry Zim, played by Gene Hackman, who's still riding that post Unforgiven sort of Oscar bump, like when he was in The Firm and The Quick and the Dead and Crimson Tide, and he is sort of sleeping with his aging star and scream queen muse Karen Flores, played by Rene Russo, and he when he meets both of them, it's breaking into their place in the middle of the night, and instead of violently pressuring him to pay up, he just like turns on a movie in his living room and waits for him to wake up, comes in, and then he pitches him on his movie idea, which is of course about a charming mob loan shark hunting down some scam artist dry cleaner on the run in LA, which one of my favorite details of which is how long it takes for Harry to figure out that he's telling a real story about himself, and it takes Rene Russo 2 seconds
to point it out.
He's clearly the loan shark.
Yeah, he's coming from experience here. I also love the that eventually the scene gets paralleled to when it shows Chili becoming more comfortable with the scene and eventually kind of falls in with Karen's character as well. But with Harry, he's a lot more just kind of, it's not as confident when he gets up and she hears somebody and she's like, go see who it is. He's more just like trying to avoid the situation as long as he can, and then he goes down. Whereas when it happens later on with Chili, he has more of obviously like a confidence of him. I think he even asks like, where did I put my gun and stuff like that. And then I love too the detail that he recognizes that Rio Bravo's on the TV. So whoever did bust in is watching that right now. And he just actually really respects that. And then having him connect with Harry when he does break in initially here, it's again over film, which I love. It's like how he constantly does make these connections with these Hollywood people. He's just like, well, what do I know that they love that I also love? Movies. And so they just cinephile out. And it's also funny because Harry doesn't have this sense of threat because you realize he's not in his own house either. It's just Karen's. So he doesn't even really think that someone has broken in and now he's sitting at the table with them, because it's like it's not really his life. So yeah, I think all these little moments of the characters really shine through and show a lot.
I like how he immediately kind of connects to his pitch too, because on some level it's his own experience as a B movie producer, constantly hunting for money and hunting for investors. And I mean, it's directly connected to the fact that he also, he owes money for gambling. There's a reason a loan shark is also coming to him, but he also owes these investors named Bo and Ronnie, played by the great Delroy Lindo, who's fantastic in this, and John Grease, who is his partner, who are two guys who essentially operate a limo business as a front for their actual business of sort of drug smuggling, which is where Gandolfini and Bear comes in, who is this Hawaiian shirt rocking smuggler and former bodybuilder, former stuntman named Bear with the beard and the ponytail. It's a fantastic look, but Harry owes these guys essentially money, who are the Hollywood example of exactly what Chili is, that they are just muscle who will go and they will get their money back. And in that case, he owes them $200,000 that he took to Vegas to try and turn into $500,000 so that he could get like his art film off the ground, which is what led me to believe it was like Roger Corman-esque, except for Corman would have never been in a position where he had lost that money. He would always have the time for it, but he always wanted to make more art movies. But it's a situation, obviously, that Chili's tough guy experience, and in putting pressure on killers and criminals, he might be able to help Harry, for example, keep these money men at bay and get his movie made. And as he says, I don't think a movie producer needs to know much about making actual movies, even though he does. And, he does come at it from a little bit of a cinephile perspective, which is how he tries to charm Karen, as Jamie, you were just mentioning, who, he knows specific lines and wants to take her, knows specific lines from her movies and takes in her movies and talks about her performances, which is immediately incredibly, moving to her. And then maybe my favorite line, though, he asks her to go see Charlton Heston be a Mexican in Touch of Evil, which she turns down, but eventually kind of sneaks into the theater to watch him. And maybe one of the best scenes in the movie, as we already laid out is just Travolta just watching Touch of Evil and just listening to the dialogue, repeating the dialogue, and just having an absolute blast. He knows the movie by heart, and he's like, that's movie magic right there.
Yeah.
That's what he wants to be a part of.
And that incredible moment where he like sort of taps the stranger and it's just like, wow, huh? Oh my God. That's my favorite thing in the whole movie. It really is. It's such
I could sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I could just relive that moment over and over again. That scene where it's like, because how many times have you felt that where you're just like, you know, you're showing somebody something that you absolutely love, and then there's those specific 10 moments in it that you're just looking over like, you see that? That was good. That's you like it as much as I do, right? It's just like that connection is magical. I absolutely loved this part. It's like the good version of how am I blanking on this? The Robert De Niro moment in oh, come on. When he's smoking the cigar.
Cape Fear. You're talking about the positive experience version of Max Cady enjoying a movie in a movie.
This is the angel version. Yeah. He's the devil.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's wonderful. I love it so much. I also love the scene right before it when it kind of introduces Harry being a little bit more like, at first he's at least funny, and so I found him to be initially charming, and then he kind of becomes more like pathetic the way he deals with things as it goes, or at least comparably to how strong-willed Chili is. Like in that scene where he's dealing with the limo drivers, and he's just like, all right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to position you in a certain way so that he's kind of directing him, honestly. It's fun. Like he's directing the director on how he can perceive these two people or how they can be perceived as intimidating and someone not to be messed with. And then he ruins it by not following his instructions.
Fucks it up immediately. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, just pretty much based out of like cowardice, where he feels he already knows how to deal with these guys, even though it hasn't been working. And with Chili, he comes from a different place, obviously, so something that Harry would not be used to. But I love, and it shows a lot.
Harry's a bullshit artist, you know, and like the thing that a bullshit artist fears most is silence. And the thing that Chili is most comfortable in is silence, is like setting up a situation where you're just letting someone sort of sit and squirm. And Harry's just like, I think, genetically incapable of that. And that's the sort of the difference between their approaches.
Definitely. Yeah, because like you said, it is right away. Like he can't even have 2 seconds of the uncomfortable kind of awkward silence. Yeah, where that's where the power lies. Chili understands that. It's like, make people just kind of start spinning their wheels, you know? Eventually you're going to get the answers you're looking for, or whatever it is you're looking for.
Yeah, Chili has like an actual plan here. He's like, look, we're going to keep this guy at bay long enough that I can hunt down Leo and I can reclaim his stolen money, and maybe we can put that back into the movie, or maybe we can do something with that. And, you know, he has that whole scene too, because it is funny because Delroy Lindo is maybe the other character who's the most like Chili. He's just a little bit more cold-blooded about it, but he's someone who is obviously a criminal who's very good at being intimidating and applying pressure and hounding money. And he sits down and kind of has a one-on-one at one point with Chili, where he's just like, you know, we're two criminals in LA, but we could go about making a movie, man. Screenwriting ain't that hard, you know?
I love that part. When he starts talking about how you write a screenplay, and he says, you just get somebody else to put in the periods where they go, but sometimes those aren't even right. I've seen some scripts. I love that whole scene. Delroy is, I don't know. I feel like he's maybe the most undervalued actor, like currently working, which I know is a huge thing to say, but like he's always so fucking good. He's so good in The Five Bloods. He's so good in Sinners. He's so fucking great in Clockers. Like this is a guy who should have like 3 Oscars on his mantle, and he hasn't even been nominated by those motherfuckers. You know?
Yeah, I mean, not enough people go far enough back into the Spike. I mean, maybe not far enough back because it technically comes out after. I think because like the tone of it looks different, people really forget to watch Crooklyn when they're going through the Spike Lee movies, and it's one of the best movies and one of the best performances by Delroy in that movie. And yeah, he's like, I mean, this movie is good on its own, but it is absolutely carried by the fact that every supporting actor is having a blast. Every supporting actor is being given dialogue that has personality. And, it's all, they're revolving around Travolta, who's acting in a very cool, easygoing fashion to them. But the other characters are taking their situation a little bit more seriously, I think. And that's why I find like Delroy Lindo is maybe one of the few characters in the movie who comes across as like genuinely, oh, this guy will just murder you. And the only character who seems to not treat him that way is Travolta. And that's why he kind of respects him a little bit. He's like,
totally.
Me and this guy are talking on a similar wavelength to each other. But then, Chili basically figures out talking to him. He's just like, well, then why do I need you? If we're basically, if you don't provide anything that I don't already provide. So I'm the one. I'm going to get 2-time Oscar winner Mr. Martin Weir, Mr. Danny DeVito to play this role. And maybe, I've heard he can be wishy-washy about signing contracts, even if he likes the script. But what if I just go to his place and I point a gun to his head until he signs? And he has that great line where he's like, Wells didn't even want to do Touch of Evil, but he had a studio contract. Sometimes you do your best work with a gun to your head, is all I'm saying.
I love too the Delroy and Travolta scene when they're in the office and talking about the script, because at first it almost feels like they are making another kind of cinephile connection where they're just like, oh, we could maybe do this, and Travolta's just kind of playing him the whole time. And you really feel like his heart gets crushed when he just goes, oh, then I don't need you, and just kind of walks out, makes a fool out of him. You actually feel like he was thinking like, oh, maybe I'm about to make a useful and kind of a friend that I can really connect with a passion, a hobby, And I found that to be just for a second, because he does end up playing like an absolutely ruthless character.
Yeah, I was going to say the next scene of him is murdering some Colombian gangster's nephew, shooting him off his balcony.
So it's short-lived, absolutely. But I also do think that it's interesting that Travolta has this confidence about him, but again, he is, and you can make fun of Harry for how he's acting and all of that, but it is still like he's just rolling into this with no connection to anything, no ties. So that confidence kind of comes from like having nothing to lose as well. Whereas every character he does come in contact with has been living in this situation for however long, and this is their entire life, this is their careers, this is their passion, whatever it is, and so it does feel like. I don't know, the movie doesn't necessarily hone in on that too much, but there is, like, the characters will make fun of him, I guess, for being the outsider, but a lot of the time the movie does just kind of go, you're wrong for that though, he's really cool, and he is. I mean, I buy it the entire time. But I do think that that's probably why he has a little bit of nonchalant attitude. He has nothing to lose.
Well, and I mean, some of this is a precursor to one of my favorite sections of The Sopranos, which is when you get to the point where movie producers love to talk to, especially post Goodfellas, they love to talk to the real life gangsters and be like, give us your consultancy and give us your patois, your energy, your vibe, the that experience of living the real thing. What's that like? And that happens obviously in the show, but it happens here where you get that scene with Danny DeVito just being like, man, I really do, my process is, really going into the community and learning the speech patterns and getting into the head of those Italian gangsters and the way they think. And I just love that Chili's like, oh yeah, well, what am I thinking right now?
Yeah.
And he's just like,
challenges him.
Well, it doesn't work like that. It's like, no, that's not what I mean, But immediately, he starts directing him and getting him into it and being like, pitching him, funny enough, because he's doing the meetings with Karen, who it turns out is, Martin's ex-husband and has a direct connection to him, and leads to so many incredible scenes of Danny DeVito just so confidently being like, hey, what's up, babe? What's going on? And, but there's this, where? I just brain farted myself. I interrupted myself by talking about.
Was it about Martin?
Yeah, no, it was definitely going to be about Martin, but I got so distracted thinking of all those moments of Danny DeVito. Just the
being a
just
Hollywood
being
star.
suave and ordering the restaurant stuff.
Oh,
this is the issue
yeah.
with this movie, is that there's an actual crime movie and crime characters happening. It's so distracted by the hangout movie qualities of this movie, which is enjoyable. And I think part of what I liked about the movie, but literally it just happened in real time to me. I was like, oh, remember that scene where Danny DeVito just is cool and awesome?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, that is kind of the whole thing. Like, you can enjoy yourself with the plotting. I do think it's well done and it's paced incredibly well. But I mean, every single, like you already said it, Josh. I think it's like each character has these very discernible personalities that are individual to them, and it's fun to watch each person interact with each other personality. They have scenes where they'll eventually kind of connect or clash, and it's I think the writing in particular is incredible in this. I mean, this is only my second time I think watching this, and the first time I really liked it, but for some reason I didn't attach myself to it. But with this, I just sunk into every single time. It was just two characters kind of giving their kind of almost opinions on filmmaking a lot of the time is what this is. But it's got the subtext of almost a threatening gangster making it happen. And in particular with the Martin scene, I think I love it when he says the thing at first that's kind of like I understand you, and then when he challenges him, he says, well, no, I'm just acting like I understand you. But at first it felt like he's got this pretentiousness that is like he's probably been saying it to other people at the Hollywood parties, right? He's probably been going around like, yeah, I really locked in and found myself in this gangster character, and I really understood the darkness that he goes through, and blah 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 blah. And then when he's face to face, eye to eye with the guy, he's like, actually, no, I'm just acting. That's really all I'm doing. Please don't challenge me any further. Yeah, I think.
Oh yeah, and that was the point in the plot that I was getting to as well, which is the fact that he's meant to be pitching him on Harry's movie, on the Mr. Lovejoy, on the art drama he wants to make, but instead Travolta is pitching him on playing him and being like, which I don't know if that's also something that
he doesn't tell
Barry
Harry
Sonnenfeld thought was like an in-joke, because at the very end of the movie, Danny DeVito actually is playing Chili Palmer, and the whole movie is, can we get Danny DeVito to play Chili Palmer? That's kind of, which is like, it's like that is the end goal of the movie, and if there is a plot, and also how to get the money for it, which is the floating $300,000 that's owned by that was taken by the guy who defrauded the sort of airline, but then also this $500,000 that is stuck, which is so funny. It spends the whole movie stuck in an airport locker being watched by the DEA because Delroy Lindo, fucked up his deal with the Colombian gangsters. And he could not get it, he basically was followed. And so it's there the whole time. And the whole time it sits there as a threat of who is going to go and open that locker. And at first they are trying to design it. I think it's like Delroy and Harry are having a conversation to try to make Chili go and do it. He interrupts this lunch which has this fantastic detail of him throwing Gandolfini down the stairs by the balls, after being like, used to be a stuntman, right? Like, were you any good at it? It's like, get out of here. Which Gandolfini takes like a champ and ends up having that fantastic scene later where he is like, talks to him about his work, and he's actually kind of moved by the fact that this guy cares enough about movies and stuntmen to even ask him, and kind of inspires him to want to get back into it, which he does by the end of the film as well.
I do have something about that particular scene that I came across, which I found really fascinating, which is that there's his one of Gandolfini's acting coaches was a guy named Harold Guskin, who wrote a book about acting. And he told an anecdote that he said that Jim told him, he said the first time he acted opposite John Travolta in Get Shorty, he couldn't see him acting at all, even from a few feet away. Travolta seemed not to be doing anything. But when Jim saw the film, there was plenty going on, and the camera had caught it all. And the thing to keep in mind is, Jim had been acting in movies for literally like 2 years at this point. True Romance was like his third or fourth movie. He'd done a couple before that, but he was still a relative novice. And the fact that he's sort of learning how to act, how to be a movie actor and how to be a movie star from John Travolta, just from sort of being in that proximity with him, I found really fascinating, because I feel like throughout the work that he's doing after this, you see him taking more and more risks and willing to do less and less on camera. And it almost feels like something he kind of
Totally.
picked up from him.
Yeah, Gandolfini, like one of the, I mean, you could say about all movie acting versus stage acting, they talk about how much smaller you can get it. You have to trust the camera to pick it up and everything. I think it's just kind of a given. But on some level, it's a huge, like, I mean, especially when I was ripping through The Sopranos, there's so many little micro details on his face that if you're not watching for them or paying attention to them, you might miss the entire emotional crux of a scene. And, the writing in the show and the directing in the show was confident enough to just like let you sit there and do that, and it takes it takes a certain artistic confidence to be able to do that. But yeah, it's cool. I didn't realize that Gandolfini was, I guess everyone on some level kind of has to figure that out. But it's funny to me that it was also Travolta, who is not an actor I would typically say is someone who obviously fantastic actor and obviously has some very subtle performances, also has some big performances.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, at this point, he's been doing it for 20 years. Like I think just through that amount of time, you just sort of develop a sense of what the camera is, where it is, what lens is on it, and what you do to come across in that. I don't know. The other thing that I found really fascinating is that Gandolfini, even this early on, was really concerned about being typecast, about not playing every role the same way, finding little differences and things that he could hone in on and focus on to make the characters different. And you can imagine a world where he basically just plays this exactly like Virgil from True Romance. Like that would be a really easy transition to make. But the fact that he's doing the beard and the ponytail and the Hawaiian shirt and the Southern accent, which was his invention, that was his choice. His agent told me that none of that was in the script, but that became really important to him, that he had to work on this Southern accent. And then it became this issue because he had to get like a dialect coach because he didn't know any authentic Southerners. And it became this whole thing that became almost an obstruction to him, that he was beating himself up that he couldn't get the self-imposed Southern accent that he had decided on for this character. And meanwhile, his agent is like, take the nice check, throw John Travolta down the stairs, make your $150,000, stop overthinking this. But this is the way he was. Like, he just, above all, was not going to repeat himself even this early on.
Yeah,
I really like that choice because it makes him feel like a similar outsider in the way that Chili is, where it's like he's someone who came to LA to do this thing. And there's something in the sort of, the way they lay out his character history is that he came to Hollywood to be a stuntman and he realized he's just this big guy and now he's, sort of like muscle for criminals. And it's something he's not passionate about. And I find that dynamic incredible because when he eventually, rubs up against some of the more psychopathic decisions that Delroy Lindo character is making and all the murdering and money he's after, he realizes, I kind of want to work with Chili. That guy's chill. That guy likes movies. I kind of wanted to always be a stuntman. And there's something about that, like that arc happening on the periphery of the movie and like not something that's necessarily that important to the plot, I think is what's special about this movie, is that there's a whole universe happening in just the James Gandolfini character's perspective on this movie. And he does receive this entire thing of, he starts out as being just like, being kind of depressed that he's just this, this Southern muscle man. And by the end of it, he's like, he finds a little bit of a movie production family that he can be a part of and he can get back into it. It's kind of beautiful.
And saves the day. I mean, ultimately, he's the one who saves Chili's life. It's great.
Yeah, and I mean, it definitely takes a turn when Bo threatens his daughter. That's definitely a huge 180 for him. But it's which I also love what that'll turn into at the finale, which we'll obviously get to. But the one thing I really liked about Karen and Chili's performance is that like they have a respect and a love for each other. But there's these subtle things that, like, for instance, like Karen says, she mentions that he'd be a really good actor. And it's basically telling him that he's really good at being full of shit. because he's never acted. He's never been in a movie. He's never been in a theater. There's no scene where they do a reading or something like that. She's seen it through just him interacting with people. And I think that is such a funny pickup that she's also kind of attracted to that, which is, I think, says a lot about her character, and it's very interesting. And then the other one is I like in that scene where we were talking about where Danny DeVito goes to the dinner and then orders for everybody. But the really funny moments
look on their faces when he makes his order, like, I don't want that. I don't want. And then the fact that he leaves before it even gets set on the table, and they all have to sit there with it. Yeah,
that's so funny. Perfect. And then I also love that this is the moment that Harry has learned that his entire film has basically been taken from him, and Chili has been doing all of this stuff, which I think is...
He's been pitching him on a completely different movie the entire time. And also the fact that Gene Hackman does incredible physical comedy as like not being able to speak and being like just in casts everywhere all over his body.
Absolutely. And it does have that kind of just analogy. I feel like you hear about it all the time where the director feels like it gets out of his control, like out of his hands. Due to the behind the scenes stuff, a lot to do with financing. And it's just funny that now it's literally just an outside gangster doing it to him, and he's lost the entire plot of what's going on.
Well, yeah, because the quest for gambling debt money has turned into the quest for financing for the movie, and the two things have become like completely interchangeable as the movie has gone on. Because Harry literally calls up Dennis Farina, which is maybe the main inciting plot incident of the movie. Is he calls him while he's taking a shit and tries to talk a big gangster, game, because again, he's just he's an absolute, practically a con artist, and he creates a situation where Bones comes to town looking for Chili and his $300,000, and instead ends up killing Bo's partner Ronnie, John Grease, over it. Bo is already obviously hounding Harry for the $200,000 he's invested, and he's being hounded by the fucking Colombian gangster for his $500,000. And all of this money is technically somewhere, but it's like all being invested or leveraged into movie ideas that are not even productions yet. And you just sit there and you go, it's Hollywood, baby. That's right there. That's the entire situation that they're stuck in. But that's what results in Harry's hands and jaw being broken. And again, Dennis Farina, like the Delroy Lindo character, being one of the few people who's bringing like an air of actual danger into the movie. But again, it doesn't feel like Chili is ever even slightly bothered by that. That scene in the when it does like the sort of like double finale, which is Bo breaking into Karen's house and waking her and Chili, like how he woke her and Harry up earlier, turning the TV to Rio Bravo to bait him, which is fantastic cinephile bait. If we hear Rio Bravo somewhere in a given 100%. Space, we will just gravitate in like that direction.
And I think it's the musical number that
Dean Martin.
Yeah, Dean Martin does, which is one of the best parts of the entire movie, if not the best part. And it would get me out of bed for sure.
Yeah, and it results in him kidnapping Karen and holding her hostage, which fantastic image of Rene Russo just like doing her Scream Queen routine in her oversized Lakers shirt that she's doing, which is just a great image. And excellent they are requesting him giving him the $300K from Leo so that he can pay back his Colombian, but he tries to shoot and sort of like betray Chili on his way out. He gets schooled on his John Wayne movies quite briefly, and then during the scuffle, Bear ends up kind of tricking him into thinking he's beating Chili because they made this whole ploy about how wouldn't it be a great idea to just knock a guy off a balcony and kill him like that, and he thinks that Bear is helping him, and instead they stage this fake movie fight in a way that ends up orchestrating it so that Bo is the one leaning against his own balcony and gets knocked off to his death, just like he did to the gangster kid earlier in the movie. And that's maybe the one like stressful moment where you think Chili could very briefly be in danger, but it is set up enough with the Gandolfini side moments that he has with him that you think that there's something else going on. You're like, no, he's actually a big sweetie. He wouldn't all of a sudden turn against this guy. But the specific scene that I'm thinking about how chill he is, despite the fact that he should feel like he's in danger, is when Bones confronts him in his hotel room with the gun, and he like pats him down and gets the key to the airport locker, and he's doing all this stuff. But he literally just sits there and smokes and is just like, nah, man, this is a little gentlemanly family disagreement that we've got to the bottom of. It's all good. Here's I got all that money and I put it in a little locker for you. And obviously with the dramatic irony that we all know exactly what's going to happen when he goes to that locker and he's going to get arrested. Although what I had forgotten was that it turns into the in-universe production of the movie on the moment when he opens the locker, which is just a fantastic bit of filmmaking. Like when he turns around and you think it's going to be Farina, and instead it's Harvey Keitel, who they joke about.
Yes.
Yeah, they joke about getting him involved in the movie, and there he is right there. And you get DeVito in the chili, outfit with the gun and everything, and Bear's working in the stunt department, and Harry's directing, and you're like, all is right in the world. And Chili Palmer did all of this just by being a cool, easygoing guy.
Yeah. And I think I
feel like I was just gonna say, I feel like anytime you've got a movie about movies, you're going to, I'm almost sort of bracing for the moment when whatever happens in the movie becomes a movie because it's set in the world of movies. And so, but I feel like they make that transition at such a perfect, clever, unexpected time that it happens literally in that edit. It absolutely catches you off guard. It's really a brilliant way to make that leap, to do it in what in a conventional movie would be sort of the crime climax, and to instead turn it into a metatextual moment, I think is a real masterstroke.
Yeah, and again, seamlessly done. Just the transition, you really don't see coming, and it is something that I feel like the idea has been done before when it comes to these meta things, like you said. But yeah, I think it's seamless. I totally agree.
Yeah.
And I do love just the other meta stuff where Chili and Karen are talking about if Danny DeVito is tall enough to play the next role that they're talking about or whatever, and just little things like that I think are really humorous and funny. Also another part that I liked was when Ray comes in and he's talking to Chili, and he's just so kind of like spun out of shape through all this stuff that he's here and he doesn't really even understand why at this point. And he's just like, I don't remember how this thing started, so fuck it. Just give me the keys. I'm not gonna kill you. He's like, I'm not even mad anymore. So why would I put a bullet in you, kind of thing. And then the other one, and this was just a brief comment, but I really like the moment where after everything is said and done and they get away with it, they put Belroy over the railing and he hits the rocks and the day is saved and everything. How Karen picks up the gun and then shoots at Gandolfini, and they have like a huge squib on the railing where it like pops off and explodes and everything. For some reason, that beat just really reminded me of a Shane Black moment, and I really enjoyed it.
Oh I could see
that.
Yeah.
And but yeah, so no, I mean, I think this thing is awesome, just incredibly entertaining and fun for what you like. When you explain the plot, you think that there would be a little bit more grit, but it doesn't need it. It's just a ton of fun.
No, and I think even when you watch it, it's very easy to underrate this one a little bit because it's just so nonchalant and shrugging everything off. But it's key to, I think, understanding that that's what the character is. Like, that's like everyone else is in a movie that should be a little bit more extreme. And I also understand too that if you're going to compare it to the others 90s, Elmore Leonard adaptations, it's hard to say that you don't get maybe a little bit more out of the soulful romantic weariness of like Jackie Brown and the Pam Grier and Forster, sort of thing going on at the center of that. Or even with Out of Sight, you could argue Soderbergh is like leans a bit more into like the sexy, suave excitement of staging some of those set pieces and that kind of, again, that central romance to it. But there's something I just find so effortlessly charming about what Sonnenfeld and what he's able to get his cast to do here, which is something that doesn't look difficult, but had to have taken a lot of planning and a lot of staging and a lot of thought to really just completely intertwine the idea of a Hollywood industry satire a gangster crime thriller and a laid back sort of hangout movie all at the same time. And it makes sense that like the popularity of Tarantino, especially at the time, would make it seem like the world was ready for this kind of movie. But I also think as a result, people kind of went, oh, it's one of those post Tarantino. Everyone was trying to make a movie like this. And there are a lot of clumsy and bad examples of those kinds of movies. But I don't think that this is it. I think that Scott Frank cares a lot about bringing Elmore Leonard's voice to the screen, and the fact that it sounds maybe a little bit similar to Tarantino is because Tarantino steals it a lot. And I think Barry Sonnenfeld, again, someone who is, you know, knows what he's doing with the camera, and even though some of what he's doing here is pretty understated, there's a lot of fantastic roaming camera work that is deliberately getting you involved in the bounciness and the slightness of what you're watching. We haven't mentioned it, but the decision to get John Lurie to score this, the jazz musician who composed Jim Jarmusch's films, Down by Law, Stranger Than Paradise, Mystery Train. It has a fantastic, goofy and groovy like jazz soundtrack to it that again feels like it's getting you swept up in the bounciness of that character. And honestly, it feels like it really just does kind of come down to they're developing a sense of easygoing freedom for this stacked cast to just have fun. And Travolta really does feel re-energized by that post-Pulp Fiction bump. He feels like the movie star cylinders are firing just on every level here. And he's incredibly likable. And, you know, the fact that he's also a cinephile, like he might be in a Tarantino movie, is something that sometimes annoys people. For me, I found every moment of it in this delightful. The Touch of Evil stuff, the Rio Bravo stuff, how much him liking movies moves everyone in LA who has become more cynical about the industry. Like that's what makes him relate to Karen, Harry, and Gandolfini. The entire supporting cast, I think, is fantastic. From, again, Gandolfini's own little stuntman universe story that's happening there. Delroy Lindo, Dennis Farina, it's one of my favorite performances from him. Gene Hackman doesn't actually have a whole lot to do, but he's incredibly funny, and it's a different performance than I think you see from him, especially in this era when he was, especially post Unforgiven, where everyone was more used to him for his menacing qualities, like you saw in something like Crimson Tide. So there's a ton to like about this, which is why this gets a very, very solid 4 for me if we're pivoting towards the reductive rating round. And the only thing I had left in my notes here I didn't hit that I need to hit, a fantastic line. Farina delivers this line. They say the smog is the fucking reason you have such beautiful fucking sunsets here. He's so mad. He's so exasperated about having to go and hunt down his money in LA, and he fucking hates that place. And I just found that the way he delivers that specifically just awesome. So yeah, very great movie.
Yeah, totally agree. I was about to say that too. It's like the 3 fuckings that are totally unnecessary. And the setup is great too, because you've established his character as such an asshole and just like tired of every single person he comes in contact with. So when he gets the most chipper taxi driver that's just like, this is LA and this is blah 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 blah, and he recites it to Harry after. I just lost it. I thought it was fantastic. But yeah, I think this movie's hilarious throughout. I think every bit of dialogue is just unbelievably witty. It has this fast pace to it, even though it is mostly a hangout movie. I think it's just because the characters are just constantly going off each other with this witty dialogue that you feel like even if the plot's not moving, something is moving along. And I love to get to know everybody more. I loved getting to know the personalities and then having them all clash with this really intelligent dialogue. I think it's just endlessly fun. And I think Travolta is really good at playing this. He's got this confidence that he needs to play this character, and because he needs to be intimidating, but he also has to be trustworthy in this strange way. And I think to balance that is really difficult. And he brings like kind of a wonder to Hollywood again, because he's so not used to all the, like you said, Josh, that he's not as cynical. So he kind of brings this like almost child wonder to it, where he's like, where everything is still stars to him, and he kind of sees the magic of it all. And it's honestly really kind of endearing to have him talk about it with other people that have become more cynical about it in the movie, and you see them kind of light up and their passion comes back for a brief moment.
It's a guy whose entire world is industry, greed, and violence, like still loving the magic of the movies, convincing all of these other people who have already fallen out of love with it to like give it another shot and be like, this doesn't just have to be greed and violence. We can be good at the greed and violence, and we can manipulate it in our favor, but we're doing it for the magic of the movies ultimately.
Yeah, he's like, we got to keep the violence and the greed because we got to finance these things somehow. But otherwise, it's pure magic, baby. No, I think
it's the most like sweet, cynical movie I think you could watch about this subject.
It really is, because it is saying overall, like, you need a gangster loan shark to be comfortable in this environment, and once you're there, though, it's fun as hell if you can withstand all of the turmoil. But yeah, Travolta, Hackman, Russo, DeVito, Farina, Gandolfini, like everyone is incredible in this. So much fun. I'll be revisiting this one for sure, over and over again, I'm sure. So 4 out of 5.
Yeah, for you, Jason.
Yeah, also a solid 4 out of 5 for me. I've always thought of this movie as being kind of, you mentioned the John Lurie score, which is wonderful. I think the movie really beautifully meshes his score with a number of Booker T and the MG's instrumentals. There are three or four in there. And
yes, him scoping out the airport locker to Green Onions is a fantastic little bit of music and cutting going hand in hand there.
Yeah. And for some reason, that seems appropriate to me for sort of just the whole vibe, the whole feel of the movie. It's just like a really tight, fun 3.5 minute pop song. It's got a tremendous amount of energy and momentum, good cheer about it, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. And I like, kind of, what more can you ask for from a 90s crime movie, really? So yeah, solid 4 out of 5 for me too.
Hell yeah. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for Get Shorty. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about a civil action. Stick around.
What they did to my son.
John Travolta, Robert Duvall, John Lithgow, William H. Macy, Kathleen Quinlan.
Your Honor, you are asking these people to create a fiction that will stand for the truth, but won't be the truth. No!
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
The truth. I thought we were talking about a court of law.
A civil action.
Damn, I just realized I forgot to bring up the fact that last film was shot by Donald Peterman, and I was going to be like, that man shot Flashdance, that man shot Point Break. Fantastic career, unceremoniously ended by the evil criminal Ron Howard by making him shoot his live-action Grinch movie.
Oh, no.
3-star classic, by the way. 3-star classic.
That's right. But maybe Jamie will do me the courtesy of leaving that in as we jump into. That's right, folks. We are talking a civil action. The 1998 legal drama / quasi courtroom thriller. I think you could. Yeah, that's a very, very minuscule amount in there. Written and directed by Steven Zaillian, who was adapting Jonathan Harr's 1995 best-selling nonfiction book about an environmental lawsuit in the 80s regarding companies chemically contaminating the water supply of a local working class community, and starring once again John Travolta, this time as the personal injury lawyer who takes on the case at the risk of his law firm being outspent by the companies. And this movie also features another pretty stacked cast of supporting actors, including Robert Duvall, Tony Shalhoub, William H. Macy, John Lithgow, Kathleen Quinlan, show legend Dan Hedaya, which I actually think, Jason, you might have been the first time we ever talked about that guy with
hell yes,
Night of the Juggler,
baby.
We bring it up.
Yeah.
This is how you get put into a certain level of guest when you brought on a film that we had never seen that gets referenced for years after we've done that episode, because we always think about him rolling into the streets whipping that shotgun out.
Oh my god,
Hedaya unhinged. Hedaya at his like most unhinged.
It's crazy. I love it. He's not going quite that hard in this movie, but he's a lovable presence and a scary presence every time anyway. But also Stephen Fry appears in this, Sidney Pollack is in this, and of course, once again, James Gandolfini. But this is our first time talking about the Oscar-winning screenwriter turned film and television director Steven Zaillian, the man who scripted and co-scripted a few films you may have heard of, such as Awakenings, Schindler's List, Clear and Present Danger, Hannibal, Gangs of New York, American Gangster, Moneyball, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and most recently, The Irishman. Actually, maybe even more most recently, he's in the sort of the mini series world. He did that the night of a couple of years ago, and then I think just last year, I haven't watched it yet, but he did the new adaptation of Ripley. Of the Ripley character.
Oh, that was him. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. That whole show, I think, was shot by.
It looks beautiful.
Who's that guy? Why am I thinking about that? The guy who shot. It's gonna pain me that I can't think of this. The guy who shot There Will Be Blood. Elswit, Robert Elswit. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yes. So I was like, dude, Steven Zaillian and Robert Elswit did a Ripley show together. Clearly, I need to be watching that. Right. Civil Action was his sophomore directorial outing following his debut chess prodigy drama, I guess, called Searching for Bobby Fischer, which I haven't seen, but it won him some acclaim. And I guess between the two films, he read this best-selling the book by Jonathan Harr, which went into just great procedural detail about a very specific case called Anderson v. Kryovic in Woburn, Massachusetts, where the residents of the town sued Beatrice Foods, a packaging company called Kryovic, and a laundry service called UniFirst, who were all guilty of dumping chemicals, namely trichlochloroethylene. I'm not sure if I'm going to say that right. And the same thing, but with perk at the front. Basically dumping it close enough to their groundwater supply that it gave many of them and their families and their children leukemia. He was able to, because this was just the era where courtroom movies were blockbusters affairs, as we were actually talking about just 2 weeks ago with the Gingerbread Man and the John Grisham effect, he was somehow able to pitch that his sophomore movie was going to be a $75 million courtroom drama that nuts. Was at least partially just about the soul-sucking process of actually doing it. It's not going to have some of the big melodramatic gestures that you see in, a big courtroom drama. It's really going to be just doing the long, difficult work that doesn't really pay off or work for anybody. In the long run, maybe yes, but then this is I have to credit Jason. This is like one of my favorite subgenres of courtroom film. I'm so glad that we're finally getting, because we haven't done them yet, but like I would include this alongside like Michael Mann's The Insider, Steven Soderbergh's Aaron Brockovich. More recently, things like Michael Clayton or Dark Waters. Any movie that is about like professionals in the legal system, just like slowly realizing the depth of the corruption around them, not through the big melodramatic gestures, but more like this almost slow acting poison effect, is I think just a fantastic genre, and it leads to so many great sort of like moral dilemma sort of character movies of just based around the sheer arduous impossibility of like, how do we resist corporations whose webs are just around us at any given moment all the time, controlling our lives.
The thing you said about the Grisham effect is so fascinating, because I think you're right. I think that's a huge part of how the movie got made, how it got financed with such a big budget, et cetera, et cetera. What's, I think, refreshing and fascinating about this movie through that lens is that, Grisham, as a former lawyer, most of the time, most of his protagonists are sort of heroic characters, starting out often idealistic characters. Maybe they are surrounded by bad people. Maybe they are sort of tempted or pulled in the direction of the inherent corruption or sort of dirtiness of the legal profession. There are certainly characters around them who represent that. But he typically has a sort of wide-eyed, idealistic, heroic leading character. And what I think is so interesting about this movie, and is probably honestly a huge part of why it was not a commercial success, is the fact that that its protagonist, at least at the beginning of the movie, is not that at all.
He's a shithead.
He is you want to talk about the stones of opening your movie with your protagonist giving us a voiceover detailing exactly which plaintiffs are worth the most money. Like that is such a grabber.
It's
opening.
A great bit of writing.
Oh my God. A great bit of writing, beautifully delivered by Travolta. It is, and like, yes, I'm fucking in at that point.
Yeah, and then accenting that it's dead children specifically that I think make the least amount of money, and that is what we're going to be talking about today, unfortunately. So it really does set the tone for what his character is going to be, and of course, like what the film eventually does, and I do think it does it a little bit heavy-handed, but I do think that it's an interesting and a good arc for him to take, is him kind of discovering the humanity within himself and kind of not detaching so much from the job that he's doing to the clients that he's working with and everything. Josh, you mentioned Dark Waters. That was definitely the movie I was thinking about throughout watching this. It's very similar to, I think it's got like a contaminated water, a contaminated
that was Todd
water
Haynes
source
doing the DuPont chemical, case in that in that particular one. I will say the one thing that Todd Haynes has going in his favor just with his movie is that it's made by the guy who made Safe. So he just has an unparalleled skill for depicting like everyday environments. Like there's this poisoned, alienated, almost ambient horror film. Like there's a shot in Dark Waters that makes a Benihana sign look like the most terrifying thing you've ever seen in your life. And that's a sense of mood that I think that Zaillian, just as, you know, it's not exactly what he's going for, but at the same time, it's also, this is his sophomore directorial feature. So I don't quite think, you know, he goes quite that far in terms of really hammering home how we are all poisoned by corporations. And he also, unlike I think with Man with the Insider, I think he does have an interesting character here, but I do think the Insider, in terms of visually expressing the sort of psychological depth of like what's happening to that Russell Crowe character, like I think all the time about, you know, the hotel wall disappearing and becoming his kids in the yard, and you know, there's gestures like that, and obviously, you know, for Man too, Man is not someone who necessarily likes to look away from melodrama, so there's some great moments in there of Christopher Plummer and Al Pacino just doing some of the best yelling acting in the same room as each other, so you're inherently going to be a little bit more energized by that. But as far as those comparison points go, I do think that, you know, I kind of agree with you, Jamie, that the arc, despite the fact this is an incredibly cynical movie and definitely a movie that is avoiding some cliches, especially of like the John Grisham era of doing this stuff, the arc does get for me a little sentimental, or at least Travolta's performance of it at a certain point gets a little bit like, you know, it's the cold-hearted guy goes, damn, it sucks when you care about your case and it makes you worse at your job. That's the thing. It's like that, like Dark Waters is a lot less personal. It doesn't take, I mean, you know, Mark Ruffalo's character wrestles with the morality and everything like that, but it's this one is very particular in the sense that it's focusing on John Travolta's kind of discovery, and then his willingness to break his own rules of being basically unempathetic because he believes that it helps his job. He wants to be detached so that he can do the best job, or at least that's what he believes, and he just starts to realize that's not exactly what's going to work. It really only works when money is the number one thing that you're looking for, and these families are looking for just acknowledgement of what horrible thing that these companies did and, you know, killed their children, and that's something that he can't just do through the rules that he's set up and applied his entire career. Yeah, but I totally agree with you, Jason, that like the introduction of him and those rules is maybe one of like honestly the consistent voiceover of him delivering these monologues where he's just walking you through his thought process. I mean, like I could feel my stomach churn a little bit when he was like, you know, describing the fact that, you know, like a dead woman gets less than a dead man, and a black person gets, you know, less money than a white man, and like the perfect victim is a white male professional, 40 years old, at the height of his earning power, struck down in his prime, and that is what he's looking for at all times. He's also looking specifically for someone who's dying a slow, agonizing death, because that will also earn him more money. And, you know, he is infamous. He's almost he's considered a you know, one of Boston's most lucrative bachelors, and he goes on radio shows and he appears in magazines where he's like, bring on, call me an ambulance chaser, call me a bottom feeder or a vulture, you know, I'm killing it right now. And he's saying that, and while rolling his paralyzed client into the courtroom and making a show of how much care he needs now due to this accident that he went through in front of the judge and jury. while also turning down a series of like stealthy sticky pad settlement offers that the defense attorneys are like 1.2, 1.52, and he agrees to a settlement before he's even giving his opening statement. And it's a great, fantastic bit of like writerly introducing of being like, this is who this guy is. This is his worldview. This is how good he is at his job. All in one.
The cutaway of the juror who's already crying preceding the actual final offer that he takes is just that's great visual storytelling right there.
And him, and I love, like I was saying too, his disconnection to all these people. He's so good at performing like he's empathetic.
Yes.
And that's one of the best parts of his character is like when he pulls him up and he like adjusts his headrest and shit like that. But he, he doesn't give a fuck. He's just doing it because he sees the woman in the jury that's got a tear down her face. And so it's just, I really enjoyed that. And I think Travolta, again, is very good at that.
He's theatrical. He's theatrical. He has a line later on where he's like, look, I can appreciate the theatrical value of dead kids.
Oh my god, yeah. But that's when they're talking about that line was so, I think, disgusting and hilarious that I was watching it in the living room where my brother, he works from home, and he was just on his computer. He even had his headphones on and everything, so he wasn't really paying attention. That line popped up and his head came up. He's like, oh my god, what? Like, it was just so appalling. And I thought it was hilarious because the way they deliver it too is so nonchalant and like, what, they're just talking business, and it's about the most like depraved, disgusting thing. We're talking about dead kids that a company is responsible for. So it's just it is truly wild and darkly kind of humorous in this weird way too. The way and
it arises because he appears on one of those radio shows where he gets confronted by a woman named Anne, played by Kathleen Quinlan, who we've talked about previously in the 90s on Event Horizon and on Breakdown, which is a fantastic thriller if no one's seen that. But she's the suffering mother of one of the children, who died of leukemia and whose case his firm is handling, but has been kind of lost in the shuffle and phone calls aren't being returned. And she essentially doubts that, as he puts it, his client's pain becomes his pain, and which he says with a little bit of like a politician smile. And she invites him to come visit Woburn and actually hear them out, and hears out what she thinks is happening to the local residents, which is that they have had 12 deaths of leukemia in 15 years. Which he goes, it's not that many, and he's like, that's a huge statistical anomaly for a town that small, and which they think is due to the local drinking water, obviously. But he's mostly just annoyed about being publicly confronted about it and his image, which is what gets his associates bringing open the file and telling him about it. And we meet a couple of them. It's Kevin, played by Tony Shalhoub, who you might remember as the guy, speaking of Barry Sonnenfeld, who gets his head exploded in Men in Black all the time. He's the one arguing that this is like a good case and it's something worth fighting for. Then he has two others, Bill, played by Zelko Ivanek, who I think we've only talked about previously on Donnie Brasco, but he's a pretty busy character actor in this era. And Gordon, played by William H. Macy, obviously Cohen alumni for Fargo and Barton Fink, before the 1-2 PTA punch of Boogie Nights and Magnolia, huge 90s run that he was on. He's the one arguing that it's...
I was just going to say, and he also has a small but really terrific role in Searching for Bobby Fischer, Zaillian's directorial debut. Yeah, he's in that one. It's so good. It is so fucking good. It's so, in a similar way to this, like, it's about a kid who's a chess prodigy, and you think going in it's going to be like, oh, it's going to be a cutesy Karate Kid sort of kid sport movie, and it is so not that. It's so not about what you think it's going to be about. It's actually really much more just about being a kid who is really, really good at something and whose parents decide it's more important for you to just be a kid. I get goosebumps talking about this movie. It is such a criminally slept upon movie. Terrific Joe Mantegna is the lead in it. He's great in it. Joan Allen plays the mom. It was the first time I was aware of her in anything. She's wonderful.
Yeah, these feel like movies that have been forgotten in the streaming era, but if you looked up the Roger Ebert review, you would see like a 5-star review or 4-star review.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I won't sidetrack us, raving about Searching for Bobby Fischer, but it's really, really good. Go ahead.
No, that's great. I'm going to check it out after this. I think I'm very intrigued by it. But yeah, the William H. Macy sort of member of his firm is the guy who is the one arguing that it's a really high risk case, and without a clear defendant to sue, and it's going to make it difficult to make their money back, meaning there are too many probables and unprovables, and Travolta wants to very much agree with that perspective, which is when he delivers that line. He's like, I appreciate the theatrics of dead kids, but there's no money here. I'm not sniffing it. That is until obviously he goes and actually visits the families affected, where he's not convinced directly by them, but he is at least convinced that something real happened here, because the families aren't interested in money. They're literally like, we just want someone to take accountability. We want closure. We want someone to acknowledge the willful negligence that resulted in this. And there's that great long wide shot of him sitting in front of them, framed by the food laid out at their meeting. That I just, what a cutaway that I was like, just the small scale of what it is that what this meeting looks like versus what it is that they're actually telling him, which is that all of our children are dead, and we just want someone to say that we did this so that we don't feel like we're crazy. And that shot was when I went, I need to look up who shot this movie. And what do you know? It's 60s, 70s legendary cinematographer Conrad L. Hall, who fucking shot Cool Hand Luke, Butch Cassidy, In Cold Blood, Fat City. Dude was also nominated for another Oscar specifically for this movie. It is really, really well photographed, despite the fact that I think that, he's being asked to do pretty understated work overall.
He is, but I think you're right that Zaillian, I think, is really good at sniffing out the little details like that, the sort of the things that give a scene like that a texture. I think he's very good at placing those scenes in situations where that makes sense, if you know what I'm saying. And I think this would have been then the year before Conrad Hall won another Oscar for American Beauty. So he was on a bit of a run himself. Yeah,
damn. Also,
which, whatever you want to say about American Beauty, beautifully shot, incredible, well-earned Oscar.
Totally. I totally agree. This is also when he sets up the thought of it, like when they respond, like, we want an apology, he kind of sets up this thought it's like, well, this is how they apologize. It's through money. And it has kind of like a dark irony to it later on when he realizes that they're not going to be able to make as much money as they thought they were going to and get it for the families. And
the way she twists that line back at him when they realize how much money they're actually going to get, and she's just like, does that really seem like much of an apology to you if money is an apology? It's like, not really.
Yeah, and so he kind of just he screws himself a little bit in this beginning, and it's truthful. I mean, what he's saying, in a sense, like, he understands that there's not a lot of humanity when it comes to these lawsuits and when it comes to these companies and how they operate.
Which is funny, because he changes his mind when he, does just a quick little scope out of the actual water and sees the companies that are nearby, and he sees all the logos on them, and he goes, there's actually some pretty big conglomerate logos here. W.R. Grace is here. A subsidiary of Beecher's Foods is here. He's like, these are companies that actually have pockets, and maybe there is something of value here. But maybe my favorite detail of which, again, just speaking of Zaillian's screenwriting detail, which I think some of the strongest stuff about the film, is that he only stops because he gets a speeding ticket going both ways to and from the town, because he's a big city boy and he could not be in that fucking stinky, working class, this dirty town he couldn't be out of fast enough. And the little gag of just the cut to him being pulled over by the same cop twice, and then that is what gets him to stop and realize what it is that he is going to do here, which is that he is going to go to war for these people. He is going to actually, send his declaration of war via a lawsuit.
Yeah. What I think is one of the things that I like so much about the movie, but specifically about Zaillian's screenplay, is as a work of adaptation, is I feel like he takes risks he leaves in things that a lesser screenwriter or even just a more conventional screenwriter might take out because they don't seem dynamic, dramatic, cinematic. And instead, he leaves that stuff in and finds ways to make them compelling. And the thing I'm specifically talking about is how much of this movie is about the logistical details of financing mounting this case.
Yeah,
I agree.
The fact that in a case like this, and there's some of this in some of the other movies you're talking about, like this comes up in Aaron Brockovich, this idea that, the lawyer doesn't take a payment up front. They just get a really large amount of the money that they get at the end. So they're taking a risk. They're sort of gambling on the case and putting a lot of money into it in the hopes that it'll pay for itself. And how much of the running time of this movie Zaillian is willing to spend on William H. Macy, like tearing out his hair, trying to figure out what corners they can cut, how they can come up with more money. Them literally who would leave in the scene where they go to the bank and ask for another loan? But Zaillian puts it in and it matters. It's it's actually important.
And then there's these long...
That I have to assume is in the material. I haven't read the book, but I'm going to assume that the book has a lot of procedurally researched, just like detail into what it is that these guys do. And I agree. I think Dark Waters is the other one for me. That's the one that really gets into that. But that's specifically because it's like, look at the monotonous hell that proper channel resistance to these companies is. And the sad thing about Dark Waters when you get to the end of it, and I think you could say the same thing about this one too, is that, look at all of the arduous effort and time, and you need you're going to spend decades of your life probably before anything gets done with this. And you're going to cost them 1/2 of like 1 year's profit at best. That. And there's something so intrinsically just exhausting and alienating and defeating about that entire process. So I agree. I think that some of the best movies in this particular genre really capture that.
Yeah, and Travolta, I think Duvall and Travolta's characters both have lines where they kind of accent how kind of pointless and useless this stuff is. It's essentially they make the analogy of like, it's the person that has the most sense, that's who loses, because they're going to quit first, because all they're going to do is just keep piling things on year after year, more money, more expenses, whatever it is, and more time, really. I mean, that's got to be, money obviously is a huge thing, but it's like, imagine wanting some type of retribution for a fucking loved one that was killed, and it's 10 years down the line. And now you're like emotionally, you'd be going through all the processes of grief already. You'd almost be over it in the sense of like how the wound has healed in a sense, but then you're still being constantly reminded of it because of this lawsuit that you still feel like you should have to pursue. So it's just like, it really is a hellscape, and it's why these cases take years. They do it on purposely. I do like the long stretches too of we were mentioning the finances, like Macy just struggling as the financier for the company, and he's like desperately buying lottery tickets at a certain point and things like that. Like, it's just, he's at his wit's end. And strangely enough too, with Travolta's character, it's his weird way of, I think, showing compassion and that it means something to him, because he's been, at the beginning, it has the whole thing about like dead kids mean the less money and how focused on money they are, and how they won't even take a case unless they know they're going to win because they need to make the money. Him sacrificing this, as superficial as it seems, is his strange way of being like, I care.
That's the beat they build to at the very end, right? As he ends up having nothing. They were like, you have no things. The things that make you a good person are the things you collect with the money that your work buys you. And he sacrifices all of those things for eventually a kind of moral quest that he goes on, despite the fact that, again, as I think, Jamie, you were just highlighting too, that he knows what the risks are and how horrible they are. One of my favorite, he has a couple different, similar to the opening, where he gives sort of, voiceover words of wisdom, where he's talking about lawsuits as war, or he's talking about, the lawyer who shares his client's pain is kind of doing a disservice to them, and because it's clouding his judgment, and he's not going to act in a way that benefits them, which is something that, sort of ends up happening to him a little bit. But one of my favorite ones is when he is talking about that winning in civil court the odds are 2-1. And he was like, stop and think about that for a second. Like, your odds of surviving a game of Russian roulette are better than winning a civil court case at trial. 12 times better, in fact, than doing that. And just the way that he talks about that, like, he has the logic and the skill and of a tactician. Who's good at his job. And every decision he ultimately obviously makes in this movie, even if it does do it so in a fairly heavy-handed direction by the end, it is to deliberately betray that, because he starts to, you know, his heart grows 3 sizes too big, you know.
He does, and later on too. I mean, it's getting ahead of ourselves a bit, but it'll all work out. The appeal eventually ends up being even worse when it like kind of fails, and then he says it's like those odds are. He basically says it's impossible, essentially. And then even as they're doing that, they're kind of cross-cutting to this like Indiana Jones ending of Files, where there's like these endless lawsuits that will never see the light of day. And that's one of them. And you know it involves 9 dead children. So you're just like, it really accents how unbelievably... You know, the system is kind of just against you, especially when it comes to these companies that have billions of dollars, the best lawyers, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's incredibly expensive and it's incredibly arduous. And I think Jason's absolutely right that it's a credit to Zaillian's script and very possibly the material as well, that so much of this takes that into account, because it's not traditionally dramatic in an engaging way that would make you back $75 million to watch people just like sit to have the scenes, for example. I mean, and he tries to make it a little bit more fun, which is maybe, I think, some of where you could say he gets a little bit writerly with the eccentricities of the characters, and he tries to make it enjoyable by like, I will say it's a fantastically fun Robert Duvall performance, but there's something so funny about how like that character and what he technically does in the movie is do something really horrible, but in a way that he feels is like he's distanced from, or it's really dispassionate. And so you're meant to kind of get into the vibe of a character who could bring himself to do that. And it's just like, what if there was a guy who was really skilled at being a lawyer, and all he ultimately wants to do is like eat a sandwich and listen to the Red Sox on the radio, and you know, steal a hotel pen and eat a gold coin. Like, all those little details to me were so funny. Our friend of the pod, Nick Johnston, described him as a lawyer in raccoon. It's kind of the vibe that he brings to every scene that he's in, but I think it's well contrasted with the fact that procedurally he's like, you know, he's the lawyer on the company side, or at least on one of the company side, who is going to outwit you know, the Travolta character here, specifically because he does not get as involved in the case itself. And he, you know, at one point gets into a confrontation with him where he specifically says, he's like, man, you wear a suit better than you wear this sentimentality. You know, let's just acknowledge that we're professionals who aren't supposed to care about this. This system is just a game that we play, and you play it well or you don't.
Duvall is really the character that Travolta would have become essentially if he didn't have this like awakening, because I really like the way that Duvall does, even when something is, whether it's bad or good, it's just kind of a straight face delivery. It's just like, I'm on the clock, man. That's it. It's a job. And I mean, obviously there's an evil to that. I mean, there's a darkness to that, but the way that he delivers it makes you think like, there's nothing else he could do.
It's less skin crawling than like the Mr. Cheeseman character, who is just like the slimy corporate representative who is actually just like completely immoral.
Absolutely.
And there's something that they thread the line. They go, Duvall is working for this guy and technically helping this guy, but he's doing it because he's divorced himself from the idea that the law is, you know, even doing something out in the real world. One of the few moments where he's confronted with what it is that he's actually dealing with is one of the most powerful scenes in the movie, which is when they're actually interviewing the sort of the victims' families and questioning you know, whether they eat bacon or they use Teflon or what other habits they have that could have caused this leukemia. He hears that heartbreaking story from that father where he talks about his child like dying in his own arms, and that quick edit to that flash cut to the car on the side of the highway as he's recounting him dying, driving the boy to the clinic and all of that, and seeing the damage that this guy could do if he was allowed to testify against his company. He immediately goes, this guy will never get on that stand. I don't care how I'm going to do it. I'm going to find some sort of loophole, and he does. Yeah. That guy never gets to. That's that moment of testifying to him is the only moment we actually see that get brought up.
Yeah, and what's really crazy is that like the way that he uses it when Lithgow comes into play, which is the judge. He starts to twist it like, well, we wouldn't want to put these families through more trauma than we already have, right? Like, I mean, like they've been going through this for months at this point. We don't want to put them on.
Lithgow, such an underrated. The way that he seems so friendly and jovial, just his look and the way that he could just turn on the slime factor. I mean, obviously we've talked about him in the De Palma stuff that he did, but like, man, when he, you know, at first you're like, oh, maybe I'm gonna like this judge because he doesn't throw out the case right away, and then later on you're like, dude, fuck this guy.
Yeah, and the thing about him too is that he's got this like, he's still the way that Duvall is spinning it is in a sense where you could like you see the logic. It's complete bullshit because we know the background, we know that the families want to testify, they know that they want their voices heard, so it's all bullshit. But it's the way that he spins it in this kind of very like professional manner, and then also what I like about the way that it's written, I guess Lithgow probably just performed it really well, but he has this ego about him where it's clear that the moment that Travolta's character challenges him and goes like, this is clearly wrong and on purposely destroying my case, he's like, no, this was my idea, not Duvall's idea. Like, don't get it twisted. This is, I'm a big boy and I made the decisions around here kind of thing. And I loved the pathetic nature of that. It was very human, and they're all trying to kind of portray themselves as kind of inhuman, just like as tools for the system, so that it works for whatever team they're on. And yeah, I thought those little moments were really, really great. And also the Gandolfini and snaky lawyer scenes, both of them are fantastic.
Yeah, those
Gandolfini just like busting through and just going like, you know what, fuck you, I'm not listening to you. I'm going to answer the questions I feel are right to answer. And then I love the scene in the alleyway where the lawyer is trying to use his knowledge of the law and be like, well, this is maybe what you should do. And Gandolfini sees right through it and has this moment of clarity that goes like, I need to separate myself completely from this guy. He does not represent me whatsoever. It's just really good stuff.
Yeah, and this is 1 year out from The Sopranos, so this is the most like that he's getting to that like where he looks like Tony you know, and but the fact that I think Jason's right that like he does play this role and he threads a much more subtle line than even he did in Get Shorty, where he's deposed and he's interviewed alongside a sort of bunch of other employees of the company who are, you know, clearly, you know, not willing to talk about what exactly it is that they do, which is that they dump all these chemicals into the, you know, river nearby. And he is the one who's just willing to be a little like, at first he's tepid about it. He's not like, I'm not out to be a whistleblower, because he looks around at all the other guys at one point and he's just like, that's like considered rat behavior. But he's like, it's also fucked up that we're not going to say anything when I know that like my neighbor's kid died because of this. And like my own kids have medical issues, including seizures and miscarriages. And he just subtly kind of goes, look, I'm willing to be truthful to these people because I think they're possibly onto something. And he's not immediately like, I'm going to go like Edward Snowden mode or anything. It really is the behavior of the company legal reps that makes him go, something sleazier is happening here. And the way that Gandolfini sort of comes to that realization where he goes, there's something off about this dynamic between these two groups of people, and then he does slowly get brought over to Travolta's side. I think that's a great little bit of acting that he does, and a really important bit of acting.
I think you're right, and one of my favorite moments of the movie is, you know, that he's so nonchalant when he says yes to the question that everyone in the room has gotten used to hearing no to. and is so nonchalant that there's
they
even
all take
a moment.
a pause. They're like, sorry?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Travolta says, what was that? And that he's not staging a big dramatic scene about it. He's very off the cuff about it. He's like, yeah, they got dumped in the ground. This is a scene. This is a character and a performance of such quiet anguish. Like every scene is about an internal struggle between doing the right thing and being aware of what the implications of doing the right thing are. And he is torn up every time you see him, but yet he's never overacting that. He's not being like melodramatic about it. He's not doing like silent movie acting or anything like that. He's so present. He's so and he's saying so much in the moments where he's not saying anything at all. That scene around
honestly, his scenes were so good that it was partially what made me think that Travolta was going a little bit more overboard with his arc.
Totally.
Because the way that he eventually performs, like I think because he just starts in such a high register that you were saying at the beginning, where it's like immediately like you're like, oh, this is one of the sleaziest cold-blooded lawyers that's ever lived. And the fact that by the end of it he's like getting teary-eyed and stuff like that to me was the part that I was a little bit like, I don't know if Zaillian quite threaded that performance and that character arc in the way that I felt it as much, but I felt that Gandolfini did. And I went, my God, because that scene of him silently, terrifyingly watching just his wife pour water for his kids, and the sound like slipping away as he's watching it is so sad. And then the following scene of him going over to Anne's place, his neighbor whose kid died of leukemia, and just sitting down with her and being like, I'm so sorry, like about what happened to your kid and how the company is behaving, and I'm just so angry, and I didn't think you would want to talk to me. And those two scenes in particular for me were like the scenes where I went, man, I was the most moved by them.
That's the heart of the movie right there, is in those scenes. And he makes that character's struggle so real. He makes his dignity so real. He's, he talked about that this was maybe the performance up to that point, at least, that he was proudest of, because he was a working class guy from a town this size in Jersey, not in Massachusetts, obviously, but, that he felt that it was the first time he'd been able to play like a working class hero. And that was how he saw Al Love as, and met him and worked with him. But he's right. Like that's that kind of, he has such quiet dignity, and such quietly seething anger, and he manages to put across so many seemingly contradictory emotions at the same time in a very brief amount of screen time. He's really only in like 3 or 4 scenes.
Yeah,
and they have a couple scenes like that. Like I love Gandolfini's perspective because he's been involved in it, so him looking at it is just like, he just seems the inevitable doom of it all. And with others, they try to...
Well, and he feels guilt about it too, right?
Of course, yeah. And
time.
Other characters feel like they've been kind of just brushing it away, kind of keeping it on the blinders, and eventually, like, I think it's Hidea's character, where he has that scene where the kids are like shooting fireworks in front of his water or whatever, and then it sets a flame because of the toxins in it and the chemicals.
God.
And then later on, he's in the restaurant and he's just looking at everybody drinking the water, and he just feels like completely guilt-ridden and just like there's nothing. But there's also the sense that there's nothing you can do. Like everyone feels so powerless watching it too. Like just something, a jug of water being poured into a glass for a child is now the most like just horrifying image. And there's nothing
one
you
of the
can
more
do about
complex moments I think that the film allows is the moment when he puts Dan Hedaya on the stand. And it's cut with a little bit of great editing where it's going. Robert Duvall is also a Harvard sort of lawyer professor. And he's laying out all the rules about what it is that you do. And, one of the big ones is you say you never ask someone on the stand the question why unless you have researched them enough to know exactly what it is that they're going to say. And when he puts him up on the stand and he asks why, were you upset that your, land is, so... chemically infected, if, I think you're responsible and you're denying that responsibility. And the way that he gets to go on that little bit of a a rant about how, you know, it's a local family owned business. And what am I like supposed to do? Of course I care about this land. Of course I care about the people in my community. And maybe I did something that seems illogical and that contradicts that. But he's just like, on some level, we're all a little complicit in what it is that these companies do. And it's not what Travolta had intended to get out of him on that stand, because because he's saying it and it's truthful. And the jury sees that.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
And he wants the pure theatric. He just wants the emotional display so that he can get whatever kind of manipulation out of the jury he can. And he's not allowing him to do it.
That's the big city boy not understanding the working class man in that case, even though he is, you know, the guy who doesn't have millions of dollars to blow on this case, even though at a certain point he starts running out of it as well.
And this feels like, unless I'm missing anything in the middle, it feels like this is when they really start to focus on them hemorrhaging money, where it's like they've got all the geologists that are kind of surveying the land and giving these demonstrations. Yeah,
Stephen Fry. He's like, hire all the nerds to put together some graphs for your jury.
And meanwhile, Macy's like, this is costing us $1.4 million. Like, this is really necessary. And like it is, but they don't understand at this point yet that Travolta's just kind of on a crusade at this point and not thinking about the company any longer, because they're just so used to him being that
they realize that when he makes the settlement offer to them, and he's like, so we want $25 million cash, which you look at all like the company men and they're like, that's not that bad. And then they're like, and $25 million for a research program into the harms of your chemicals and the cleanup. And they go, okay, maybe that's a little too steep. And then he goes, and $1.5 million per year for each family for the next 30 years, totaling $320 million, which gets his own team to look at him and say, dude, that's so obviously ridiculous. You clearly want to take this to trial, even though you know by your own rules that you won't win at trial. It's incredibly difficult.
I also love the the way that Travolta performs, and I assume it's in the script, is that he does it almost as if it's a split decision. He had it was like he was wrestling with it, and in the moment he went, you know what, fuck it, I am gonna do it, because he does the 25 million, and then he does a pause, and he kind of almost performs it like he surprised himself that he goes 25 million also for research, and then it just spirals out of control from there. And I love too that the opposite end, the lawyers for the companies are just like, they don't even say anything, they just get up. They're like, all right, we'll see you in court, bro.
And Duval's like, this is a great pen in this hotel room boardroom. Can I have this?
Thanks so much. It really is good. I do love that part. But what I like too is, and I do think that the Travolta arc is a little bit heavy-handed, even though I think it's really well performed and I did enjoy it. This is where I think it's I just love that I guess it's based on a true story, so it kind of has to follow this plot line, but I like that it ends with him just fighting and technically losing. I mean, he wins. We kind of get a victory in the epilogue a little bit when we get to that, but really he is just kind of like sacrificing his entire life for a statement. And I didn't really see that coming, because I didn't know the story itself, but I thought that was an interesting plot. I thought it was going to turn into the whole thing where he's like,
they had already wasted all. They had wasted all of their money before the trial, and then they're like, dude, you want to go through a lengthy trial? That's when you get the hilarious montage of Macy cutting the costs and like laying off the staff and like opening up 1 million credit cards and vacuuming their own floor while calling other credit lines because they've gotten rid of the cleaning staff.
Still staying in 5-star hotels because they have to keep a presentation and shit like that. Like, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, but Duval totally exploits the fact that he's like, here is a guy who's making decisions motivated by a sort of moral and a emotional quest to do justice and get truth. And Duval is like, that's just not what our job is, man. Like that scene when they're both waiting in the lobby and while the jury is deliberating, like whether or not they're going to hear the testimony from the families, and they discuss their role. Duvall explains that we're kind of like kings making important decisions and deciding the fates of others, and the justice system is this game that we play. And he has this great line where he's like, if you're looking for the truth, look for it where it is, at the bottom of a bottomless pit.
Yeah.
And he's finally met a lawyer who is kind of equally as cynical as he was at the beginning, but he's not tortured about it at all. He's just like, dude, this is what we do. This is what our job is. This is what makes us good at what we signed
up for.
And when they reach that verdict, it's like, yes, his case can continue against the one company, but not his. And Duvall just outclasses him and then kind of disappears from the movie for a little bit.
Yeah.
Duvall's powerful, man. He's like untouchable in this movie.
Yeah, it's like him and Gandolfini are my two favorite performances in the movie.
Yeah.
Like their scenes are just completely electric, and it was mostly after that portion, which is when I got a little bit more like, we're gonna get into I like the scene because I just like Sidney Pollack, but we started getting into more of the scenes I kind of expected, like a little bit more of like the cliche of him going to like the Harvard Club, and there's the business guy is like talking to him about his yacht instead and how he went to Cornell, and he's like that funny detail of him being like, put your feet up on the antique table while we talk about the fact that I'm going to give you $8 million and only $8 million, cover the expenses of what you've sunk into this venture, and that's basically it. You're not going to get anything else from me.
Yeah, I like these details. I wasn't a huge fan of I think the placement of them, just because I felt like at this point we were kind of on a really smooth trajectory throughout his the bankruptcy and him trying his best to represent the families. And I get that this is part of his kind of personal experience and his personal kind of I don't know, losing his success in his career. It's just I don't know. I just it felt like it deterred a little bit from the focus on his connection with the family and the case and everything. I don't know if you guys felt that as well, but.
Well, it does result in him having to go directly to them about it, and which is one of the stronger scenes. But I think for me, it was around this time that it just felt like Travolta had done such a crazy flip in terms of what his character was and what his character is now, that I'm like, dude, I don't know how disgusted the guy who said I love the theatrics of dead kids would be at the Harvard Club guy. That was the thing where I got that was the thing where
it's almost like he would go along with it even if he didn't quite line up with that lifestyle anymore.
Yeah,
he wouldn't
and I mean, I get it. The movie is showing us all the details that made him do this flip. I think it was just I felt like in some of the writing, or maybe in Travolta's performance, I did not. The transition felt like it happened really quickly, even though the movie does kind of take its time. And I think it's just because of the way that, he performed some of the scenes. And I was just like, dude, you were not different than like any of these people 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, because even when he does this flip, there is still a little bit in his performance that feels like he's performing.
He puts on that charming smirk a little bit, even in the courtroom, and
so it does feel. I totally get what you're saying, and the movie does kind of still. It's like you can still see that a little bit in his performance, but the movie is telling you that he's completely made a 180, and I don't entirely buy it, but I do for the most part. I think that he's definitely found some humanity, and I do think the movie shows you that. It's just it's maybe the degree that it does it, and it does feel very much kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Even if
I don't know if it was just
like
starting him at such an extreme that the great opening of this film does, but yeah, it made me not feel it as much as I feel it, for example, in like the Gandolfini performance, and
That's
I feel
really
it
or Duvall.
Yeah, and I'm not totally sure exactly why.
Because even Duvall has like again, he kind of sticks to what his character is because he's so just hardened in his ways. But there are moments, I feel like, when he's talking to Travolta that are just like, I see why you think this way. Why there's like this bit of humanity in you, but I'm telling you, it's never going to work. And everything is against you, and you should just give in. And there does seem to be this kind of, I don't know, this like 1% humanity that's still within Duvall, that's kind of disconnected to the company and everything, but he'll never let that come through. He just sees it and he's aware of it.
I think the film just requires you to think that the Travolta characters has a level of like moral torturedness that Duvall is telling him you can't have in this line of business. And obviously I think it's fantastically written in that way. Yeah. I just for whatever reason, when I got to those moments, I went, oh, I don't know that I really thought Travolta was that tortured over this. I thought he was interested in this case because there was big pocketbook companies. Sure.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was maybe some of the characters around him who were having the more emotional experiences of what this humanity, and you can argue that, because he witnesses those things, that's why this ends up kind of happening to him.
Yeah.
But,
and I think
that was just my original read of it, but I'd be willing to watch it again.
Yeah. And I did really enjoy it. And I do think that maybe the reason we read it this way too is because even though I do think it honestly does do a decent transition of him discovering that, empathy along the way, I think how heavy-handed just the last 5 to 10 minutes of it, where it's just like, and now I've sacrificed every single thing. And even though this is true, like this is apparently a true story, I maybe it's just the totally pacing true. Of the beats that makes me feel like there's still a little bit of his con artistness.
There's something about that slow
him,
push in on him while Kathy Bates is like, you sacrificed everything in your life. Yeah. Why would you do such a thing? And you get that big Travolta smirk on his face, like to feel like a good person.
I'm such a good guy,
man. That's all it was.
I get what you're saying. Totally. Also, I want to love the random Kathy Bates cameo pop up. I was like, holy shit, it's Kathy Bates. That was just awesome. That's
a great experience in any movie where you just go, holy shit, it's Kathy Bates.
Yep.
Yeah.
Holy shit, it's Dan Hedaya. Look at that.
Absolutely. But yeah, so I think honestly most of this works for me. It's just that it feels sometimes with that Travolta stuff, I guess just a little bit I don't even know if contradictory is the word, but it wrestles.
Maybe it's the Travolta movie stardom working a little bit against the written arc
as
of
opposed
the character.
To Get Shorty.
Would be my only diagnosis that I can possibly think of. Whereas I do think, for Get Shorty, it's like no, the movie stardom is that character. Right. It's the only. In fact, I think it's arguably doing more than what's on the page for that character.
Yeah, and I will say too, I was kind of watching it, and at a certain point. And it's not really fair to these moments in the film, but I was like, I honestly thought I knew exactly where it was going. In some sense, like I thought it was going to turn into this more schmaltzy, and overly schmaltzy, like, he does save the day, and it's not this more complicated thing where the case gets, buried for a decade.
No, I'm a huge fan of the fact that he has to confront the family, and the family goes, we said we didn't want money, we just wanted an apology, and this is a shitty apology. And then he continues the investigation off the books where he finds a guy who rented the dump truck to do the cleanup for a couple of Celtics tickets, which is a crazy fucking detail. And then
that's the kind of detail that
critical.
I was going to say that's the kind of detail that you do only get in like nonfiction reporting.
Definitely.
Yes.
That's a real
somebody made that up with sound made up. Yeah.
Courtside.
Exactly.
You kidding me? Hell yeah. Fuck the kids.
Yeah. And the fact that he also just discovers all that critical evidence that maybe would have won him the case like after the fact, like that's something that feels like very
detail.
real, and that it would have to go through a whole lengthy resource heavy appeals process that's even like more of a fucking labyrinth than anything that he just went through, and results in him essentially just writing to the EPA, who ends up having more of the resources to actually take it on, and he gets the big monologue, if you decide to take it on. And he does get a little bit schmaltzy where he's just like, maybe you'll be able to succeed where I failed, and if you calculate success and failure as I have in dollars and cents divided neatly into human suffering and arithmetic, says I failed completely. What it doesn't say is if I could somehow go back knowing what I know now, knowing where I'd end up if I got involved with these people, knowing all the numbers, the odds, I'd do it again. Damn baby.
Straight.
He's
a man of the people now. Justice. That's right.
I mean, The interesting thing to think about in terms of this Travolta performance too is this comes at the end of a year of 98 where that spring he was basically playing Bill Clinton in Mike Nichols' film of Primary Colors. And so I think those are sort of interesting performances to compare just in terms of the sort of charming charlatan and how the sort of similarities and differences between those two pieces of work for him.
Okay. I haven't seen that actually.
It's really worth seeing.
Me neither. I've been meaning to watch that and the other one that he had a crazy 1997 too. I've never seen Mad City, the Costa Gavras film he did with Dustin Hoffman. Speaking of Dustin Hoffman, which we were talking about earlier.
God, did they talk about that on set when they were making that movie? That came out, in 97. So that would have
came out right after Get Shorty. I wonder.
Yeah.
Someone needs to have gotten a recording of Dustin Hoffman and John Travolta talking about Get Shorty. And Costa Gavras being like, what are you guys talking about? Would have been wonderful. But yeah, I think pivoting towards reductive rating round on a civil action, because of some of the reasons that we've said, I think a civil action did end up getting closer to more like high 3 territory. For me, I do think that it's kind of unfairly forgotten, considering the fact of just, you know how stacked it is and how many great creatives are involved, like obviously in the cast, but you also have Conrad Hall and Steven Zaillian. And I do think Steven Zaillian is a fantastic writer. And I think there's a lot of really, really interesting decisions he makes in terms of writing character and structuring this to have as much procedural detail about how arduous and painful the process of actually fighting these cases is. And obviously so many other filmmakers would make similar movies like this. And though I think some of them might do it with a little bit more my speed in terms of just how visually and tonally bleak they are, like things like Dark Waters or Michael Clayton, which I don't think I brought up, but that's another one that's kind of in this wheelhouse, or like with Aaron Brockovich and The Insider. I do think that of all of those, it's funny to find the one that is clearly the precursor or the one that came out before any of those is maybe the one I had, a harder entry point into. But I really do think it just ultimately came down to and again, I don't think it's because he's bad. It really just was for me the Travolta performance and the extreme thing they try to get you to buy in this movie, which is that at the opening of this movie, this is like the sleaziest, most cold-hearted. I love the theatrics of dead kids. I love to put people into the numbers of how much their suffering is worth and be braggadocious about it in almost that like 90s, you could see Pat Bateman saying something like that. And to have him by the end of it have to deliver these more sort of sentimental moments of like, if I could lose all my things again just to fight for the cause, I'd be there and I'd do it. That's such a crazy thing for Zaillian to have to, and for Travolta to have to convince you of, that I did have a little bit of trouble with it. But I think outside of that, there's so much in here that is fantastic. I think the supporting actors are doing so much work for this. Again, any scene with Robert Duvall just being like the guy who's so divorced from the horrible things he's doing and so bought into just the plain work itself that he just feels like a goofy old timer you'd love to have lunch with. And James Gandolfini, who again, I think quietly and seethingly does the actual emotional work of this movie in just a couple of minutes of screen time. And I found his stuff maybe the most powerful in the entire movie, which is a huge credit to him and everything that he does. But yeah, other than that, Zaillian is writing great characters. Again, he's spending a lot of time really, really getting into the nitty gritty of the procedure of this genre that I really appreciated. And yeah, even you could say that he's working with enough money here that there's a lot of slick meat and potatoes filmmaking going. Like this was consistently engaging and watchable, and I do think does have a very interesting idea at its center, which is that which is just observing the nature of navigating like the technical strategy of the legal system and how overwhelming it is to fight these corporations, and how analysis of risk and manipulation is probably of more value to you than any sort of morality or truth, which sounds like a simplistic idea, but I think it's well captured in the film. So yeah, very, very solid to high 3 for me, and I might even come back back to this at some point too.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. It's a very, very, very strong 3. I really do like it. I just think it's whether or not the personal journey of Travolta's character works for you or not. I do think, honestly, like most of it does. It's just some of the stuff that we've talked about feels a little heavy-handed. And I don't know if I completely buy the full 180 transition, but it's still, I think that he's really good in it. I'm not taking anything away from Travolta. There is a little bit of that like movie star performance, I think that's in here that might not entirely fit, and maybe that's the like 10% that I don't enjoy. But
I think it's because the evil stuff, he's so convincing as the smirking asshole,
yes, sure,
that it's a little bit just less
sure,
convincing as the sentimental stuff.
Right,
but the movie star stuff is there. Like Travolta knows what he's doing.
Right, and so when he turns from like smirking evil like Theatrics of Dead Kids to Kathy Bates, him going like, what happened? And he's just like, well, I changed as a person. That's what happened. Like that kind of thing. It feels,
I care now.
Yeah. It feels a little heavy handed, but again, I'm really accent on the little, because I do think most of this works. And again, like you said, I think Duvall is fantastic. I love his jaded old man kind of performance about like, he's so set in his ways and so used to this process that he's just like completely emotionally detached from it. And really, even if he had emotion towards it, he's like, what's the use in it? I've seen this so many times that it's not a useful tool. So it's really what Travolta said in the beginning. He's like, we should not be empathetic. It doesn't help our job. And that's why there's just such a lack of humanity in it a lot of the time. But I like that he just sits in that and he's very comfortable with it. I think that's it. There's never a scene where he's just like, I actually wrestle with this every single night. He's like, right. No, I'm really just trying to watch or listen to Red Sox and eat my sandwich and have a good time. But they keep dropping cases on me. I don't know what to tell you. So I really like that. William H. Macy as he like unravels as the financier, I think is actually really entertaining, very funny. Him desperately getting lottery tickets, and at a certain point he's like, there was another thing that he does that's like out of desperation that I found funny. It's in my notes somewhere, but regardless, it's good stuff.
I thought him vacuuming while trying to open up multiple credit cards because he's fired the cleaning staff was one of the funniest things in the movie.
Yeah, the office getting emptier and emptier as he's making these phone calls is a really great detail. Lithgow, fantastic. I love his like egotistical kind of almost like kind of pathetic portrayal of the judge that is just like just very he almost feels insecure, strangely enough, even though he tries to perform as a very confident judge. And then Gandolfini is just amazing. I mean, he's only in I think 3 scenes or something like that, but he's so essential to the story and is really the kind of heart and just the worker's perspective, like the everyman's perspective. And I think he does such a good job of it. And I love when he goes up against the snaky lawyer and just one-ups him and doesn't believe him. And I think that's great stuff. It's cool that this is Dark Waters before Dark Waters. I didn't know that there was something else exactly like this, because it is very similar. But I do think that, like we said with the Travolta, the personal journey perspective makes it so that you have to lock in with that character. Whereas I know Dark Waters is still focused on Ruffalo, but I feel like it's more focused on the case rather than the personal arc that he goes through in order to find his humanity.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's more like the personal arc that he goes through is just like a guy putting in the hours.
Yeah.
And how, again, that's more where like the little bit of hope comes from, is that like there is someone who's willing to just be a worker bee and do all of this fucking mundane bullshit day in and day out for years and years and years and years. It reminds me more of like the work you see characters doing in something like Zodiac or something.
Sure, right.
That's the register that like Dark Waters hits.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is it's like this. It's crazy that a movie like this has a $75 million budget. I wish that was still a thing. But I also think it's pretty wild that even I know it's a failure technically on its budget side, but making $55 million on like just a grounded drama is pretty wild. Like I'm pretty sure we could probably find examples of that. Like I think Dark Waters did okay. I know it critically did well. I don't know if it did well financially, but it just feels like something that we wouldn't see successful any longer as the dry courtroom drama. So it's just a time to look at and miss, I guess. So anyway, yeah, strong 3.
Yeah. For you, Jason.
For me, it is a solid 4.
Nice.
I mean, the phrase that you used, Josh, when you about meat and potatoes filmmaking, and this idea of how much they spent on this and how much it made, it just like this. Just I get very nostalgic for this sort of just like programmer, everyday professional, solid, well-budgeted, well-made movie, like it does feel like, that I don't mean to turn into the whole, we were a country once meme, but that really is missing. And if this book, were a bestseller in 2022 and were acquired to be made for today, it wouldn't be a feature film. It would be like a limited series on Netflix or a Max original, where they just like stretch it out to 6 hours, because that's the only way you get something like this made anymore. I just found myself so drawn in to this narrative. I cared so much about all of these characters. This sort of a robust supporting cast just feels like a very 90s thing. Like, these were just who you could get for these roles. And I do love this period in Robert Duvall's career. Like, he was always good, but he just sort of reached this tide in, say post Days of Thunder, I guess, where he had been doing it for so long and was always such an understated actor that it felt like he really increasingly was was in a zen place where he just existed on screen and was there, and you watched him and you believed every gesture that he made and every word that came out of his mouth. And this is one of those great Robert Duvall performances from that period. So by the time it sort of hits the rougher patches that you guys are talking about, which I understand and even sort of agree with, I was just so drawn into it that I was willing to kind of take it wherever it was going to go. I wish that Zaillian had more opportunities to work as a director on this sort of budget level. He kind of blew it with his All the King's Men adaptation, which I rewatched for the book because Gandolfini and him worked together again on that. And it just misses, he just didn't quite nail it there. And that kind of sunk it because that was sort of a legendary flop. But I like the work that he has done in television. And I was going to say the sad footnote to the Gandolfini of it all is that The Night Of, which you mentioned when you first brought him up, was supposed to be a Gandolfini project. Oh
man,
his HBO.
Who was he supposed to be in that?
The Turturro role. Like
really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like I read that at one point. I just memory hold that, but that would have been special.
Yeah. They shot him in the pilot, which they sort of did the pilot as a standalone thing to try to get HBO to pick it up for a full season.
Oh my God. So that's how close he was to doing it. It wasn't like, oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. No, they shot the entirety of that pilot with him in it. But if you remember, the lawyer character doesn't come in until the last scene. And it had been picked up and they were going to do it. And then Jim died and it went fallow for a while. And then eventually they picked it back up, reshot just that one scene. And then, the whole rest of that series. So that would have been.
If no one's seen that, they should absolutely check it out, because
good.
Speaking of, like, especially if you like the idea of, again, just the focus on the procedure, because that show I think disappointed people at the time because it was so. Like the pilot made it seem like it was going to be a murder mystery show.
Right.
And I remembered in real time feeling people get disappointed that it was like, oh, he wakes up the next day after a one night stand, the girl is dead and we're going to find out who did it. And it's like, that was not the show. No. The show was the process of the justice system and how it will grind someone down, even if they're doing all the right things. And you get to the end of that show and the arc Riz Ahmed goes through on that show. He's Zaillian's a fantastic writer. So and hey, he recently he did 2 masterpieces by 2 of my favorite directors. The Girl with Dragon Tattoo, I think he did a fantastic adaptation of, and The Irishman. The Irishman is don't need to say anything about that. It's undeniable. So.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yes, indeed.
But yeah, thanks so much, Jason, for coming on this weekend and for bringing these films with you. Once again, that was Get Shorty from 1995 and A Civil Action from 1998, which I don't know when I would have got around to. So I'm very glad that I watched it.
Good.
What is going on in Jason world other than, obviously get the Gandolfini book? We'll have a link to the book in the description of this episode, but you got anything else you want to shout out while you're here?
The newer podcast that you mentioned in your intro is Guide for the Film Fanatic, which I do, again, with my creative partner, Mike Hull. Each week we invite a guest to come on and pick one of the 1,600 plus movies in Danny Perry's Guide for the Film Fanatic, and we spend an hour breaking it down, talking it up with them. It's a good show. We've only done six. Cool. I think our 7th episode is going up on Sunday, but it's a lot of fun. So give us a listen. And then aside from that, get Gandolfini wherever you get your books or your ebooks or your audiobooks, which is a first for me on this one.
Did you read it yourself?
Oh, certainly not. No. I mean, we've been talking.
Okay.
We've been talking for 2+ hours. You don't want to listen to me talk anymore. No, I just felt let's. I hadn't done it. I was nervous about it. I didn't know how I would do it because the book is very.
Let the professionals.
Yeah. The book is really quote heavy, and I was like, am I going to have to do like voices? Do I have to sound like Edie Falco here? Let me turn it over to a professional. Right. So we got a guy who's kind of one of the rock stars of the audiobook world. His name is Eduardo Ballerini. So as you can tell, he is also of a more appropriate background than I am for saying some of, say, the very Italian names in the book and things like that. So yeah, he did a bang up job with it. I couldn't be happier with that. Anyway, available in all those formats. Pick it up if you like this tremendous actor in these small but memorable performances.
Hell yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks again so much, Jason. For our listeners, we're going to be back in 1 week's time where we are going to be doing, as Jamie alluded to, your patron voted episode. Again, Democracy Reigns over on the Patreon once every 2 months. And you guys voted for a Gene Hackman double feature of The French Connection and Night Moves, which is crazy that we had not talked about either of those films yet. So that's what we're going to be doing exclusively on Patreon next week. And then in 2 weeks' time, over on the main feed, we have a special guest joining us, one of our guests who likes to bring on the most obscure shit we will have never seen. And we're going to be talking about 2 movies I literally had not heard of. We're going to be talking about Angel Dust and another movie called After Last Season. I literally didn't even have a chance to look at what these were yet. But I'm sure, this is a guest who has been on the show a lot, a guest a lot of you trust for specifically transgressive films and Japanese transgressive films. Beautiful. So I'm assuming we are going to be finding some, we are going to be finding some good stuff there in 2 weeks' time over on the main feed. So yeah, thanks so much for listening and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, everybody.